Like, I'm not saying that the acid, you could dissolve and soften the stone to make it like a cinnamon roll. I just mean it softened it where it was compressed by half an inch. With the Americas, it's like we're studying aliens, right? Because they're so different from the Western mindset. The dilemma that we have with studying the Maya is the same dilemma that we have with studying the Egyptians, in that we look at them the way they wanted to be looked at. Their propaganda worked, and it worked for all of eternity. The big mystery here is that the ancient Egyptian lotus flower does not exist anymore. They used them so much and they were so popular that they went completely extinct. He's like describing the experience of the lotus flower. He says, when you take of the lotus flower, your mind expands and your eyes become imbued with dynamic properties. You know, we have this idea of Egyptians living in the desert. They didn't live in the desert. They lived in the fertile oasis on the green Nile, walking on grass every single day. God's really out there. He's far away and distant. It doesn't have a lot to do with our lives, but here's what we can do to control our lives. That began in Athens in the 5th century. That is such a perfect example of who the Athenians are as a people. Their central piece of public architecture is not a pyramid, it's not a coliseum, it's just an open colonnade building for people to meet and talk to one another. And they drew the line in the sand on that day in the early 5th century BC between West and East. And that's where Western society was born, on that day.
Appreciate you coming down, brother.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me back. The studio has evolved so much since I've been here.
Yeah. What's your impression?
It feels like I'm in a real studio this time. I walked in and it was like I was on the set of a TV show or something now.
Yeah.
You know, I just love it. The colors are so vibrant, and you know, I don't know. It's just like you guys have just evolved so much in the last, what's it been, a year and a half?
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of evolution, and the vases have multiplied.
Yep.
And but yeah, man, I'm just happy to see that your channel has grown so much, and you guys have like matured as the show so much.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Yeah, the Vases had babies. And they've grown for sure. But and the channel, man, we're up to almost 50,000 now. So it's like 49. It'll probably be 50 maybe when this episode comes out.
Yeah.
So
that's really close.
Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty cool. Got 100,000 on Facebook as of yesterday.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So all good growth here, man. What have you been up to, brother? You've been traveling.
Traveling a lot.
Yeah.
I went to Egypt twice in the last 5 months, and went to Mexico and Guatemala in between there, and just traveling and figuring out a lot of the direction that I'm taking going forward. I feel like my perspective of the world has just changed so much since I started traveling a lot about 3 years ago. I know we were talking last night, and I was saying, like, man, I've traveled so much, I'm ready to actually just to stay home for a little bit. But I've been gone for at least 10 days a month for the last 3 years, traveling everywhere.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's been a lot. But I think that it's kind of laid this foundation of having a perspective of the ancient world, and also knowing what traveling is like, and traveling on my own. Like, I spent a considerable amount of time in Egypt by myself, and getting around Cairo on my own, getting from Cairo to Alexandria by myself. I think I learned a lot about the world, about the ancient world, but also like contemporary people. People in Egypt, in the Western world, we have this idea that like, is it safe over there? These are just normal people trying to get through life and enjoy their life and not get caught up in anything that complicates them enjoying their life in the same way that we do, right? And I've just learned so much about, having a greater perspective and a more realistic perspective of the world. And also, I think somewhere along the way, I started having an appreciation for like the origins of Western society and where these things have come from. And as we'll talk about later, some of this began with me studying the vases and how ancient cultures interacted with the vases, and how I think that some of this has to do with Egyptian mythology, mystery schools, psychedelic usage or something, and it's kind of dripping into Greek society, and then somewhere along the way, the Greeks have this epiphany that is the origin of Western society. Anyways, just a lot has changed in the last 3 years, and just so much. It's so much.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you mentioned that Egypt was one of the safer places. Like you weren't sure what to expect kind of going into it, but then we're kind of blown away by how peaceful it was, and that it was just, you could walk anywhere. And
yeah, man, I could walk anywhere in Egypt, and nobody's gonna mess with you. Everybody is so nice. Latin America can be safe to travel to. You go where you're supposed to go. Go where tourists need to be, go to archaeological sites, back to your hotel, town square where restaurants are at, you're going to be fine. But, outside of that, you never know what can happen in Latin America. But in Egypt, you can go anywhere, do anything, visit anybody, and you're just perfectly safe. It would be totally against the worldview and the religion of people living in Egypt to commit things like petty crime or to put your life in danger. Egyptians are very nice, and Egypt itself is very safe. I loved traveling to Egypt.
So how does South America contrast then to Egypt? Like what was it like there for you?
Yeah, so whether it's anywhere in Latin America, Mexico, Central America, South America, all three I've been to just in the last 8 months or so. And for the most part, the people you meet there are really nice, just like the people you meet in Egypt. But there's elements to that society that can be far more dangerous, like organized crime. Organized crime does not exist in Egypt. Egypt is a military state. So, and also their religion itself, it would be haram to commit petty crime against people. That dilemma does not exist in Latin America. So there is organized crime. And when you are traveling around in Latin America and you veer off, the safe path that you're supposed to be on, like if you're there with a tour company, you're going to be fine. But there's this added element of danger there. And so, even in times when I step off the beaten path and go out into the jungle, I think that might be the thing that Dr. Barnhart worries about for me is, I always tell him I'm personally worried about, dangers such as like snakes and things like that. And he's like, well, I'm worried about you for you finding people out there, So there's this added element of like this wildness that can be in Latin America. But again, you travel with a company, you're going to be fine. Cusco, as you know, is absolutely amazing. That's one of the best cities I've ever been to. You can walk down any street, any alley in Cusco that you want to, and it's this perfectly nice, serene city. But yeah, Latin America, of course, has this like little bit of like a wild flavor to it.
Yeah. What about you were mentioning at dinner last night that some of the I guess what are the groups that are responsible for like some of the artifacts that are being looted down there? And
yeah.
You mentioned an email that you got. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about that. Okay. So I got an email maybe about a year ago while I was on a trip in Mexico, and it was from some Russian agent. And it was like this email that self-destructed after I read it, or after I opened up the link and read this message. But it was basically this guy telling me that he's a Russian merchant of some kind, and that he was in Mexico. And he said something about like, I've been following your adventures or whatever. If you find anything, you can contact me through this number, and I'll meet you anytime, any place in Mexico. And he just said he'd buy whatever I found, and I was like, oh God.
Wow.
So I deleted the message. I never responded to it.
Yeah.
But it was the message was clear and astounding that, whoa, okay, this black market is alive and well, and they are wanting to buy things. I met a Russian archaeologist. Whoa, am I connecting two things here? I met a Russian archaeologist that same week. Whoa.
Oh, gotta be connected.
I'm having an epiphany right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I met a Russian archaeologist. Oh my God. This is where the connection is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I met a Russian archaeologist that same week, and he told me that he was called up to Moscow to verify some Aztec artifacts, I believe, and they put him on a golf cart, and he's driving through these. Airline hangars basically, and it's these buildings that are full of ancient artifacts. And he said some of the doors are like halfway open because there's people walking in and out. And he said he saw just 100 yards of Egyptian statues on these shelves, and it was just hanger after hanger after hanger. And they pulled him into this Latin American Mexican hangar, and he said it was Aztec statues that he'd never seen before. Just tons of them. These huge megalithic statues. If you go to the National Anthropology Museum in Mexico and you walk in that Aztec area, you're gonna be blown away, dude. There's stuff there that is. I don't know why it doesn't reach like the popular stage as well as other cultures, but there's so much there. But yeah, so he said that he was absolutely mind blown, and maybe this was a year ago. I had this conversation, and he said it wasn't long before then. It was within a few years of then. But he said, yeah, that the Russians have so much, and they also have. So there's 4 codices, Maya codices around that we know of the thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands that existed 500 years ago. And of the 4 that we know of, the Russians have one in Moscow. And so now that I'm thinking about it, I was talking to that guy about me exploring around in the jungles, and then it's the same week I got that email.
Did you give him your email address?
No.
Okay.
But my email address isn't hard to find.
They could probably find it. Yeah. That's crazy.
I can't believe I just thought about
definitely a connection there.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. So it's a state-sponsored thing. I mean, it's got to be a state-sponsored thing, I would assume.
That like the Mexican government is involved in it?
Well, the Russian government is involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure, yeah. Well, I'm sure, all of those high-ranking Russian officials. I mean, Putin's a historian. He has an appreciation for history. I'm sure I'm sure it's a little side hobby for him. To have his boys go all around the world and collect things to bring to him. He doesn't have time to go like on a tour across Mexico or Egypt or something. So they just steal things and take them back.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, totally.
So they're getting it. You think they're getting most of it? Do you think they're doing it themselves, going out to these places and like looting? You think they're getting it through?
Yeah. So in the Petén in Guatemala, one of the things that they're combating right now is, the cartels have their own LiDAR drones. The cartels have their own LiDAR planes. So they got everything that the Mexican government has, the cartel has as well. And so they launch expeditions themselves to go find these lost cities. I have I'm sure we've talked about this before, and maybe you have access to this as well. There's a complete LiDAR map of the entire United States that I think the Comet Research Group has, and they gave me access to it. You may have it too. Why am I blanking on his name? Who's the
George?
No, Carolina Bays. Why am I?
Oh, Chris.
Chris, yeah. Chris gave it to me. So Chris gave me this LiDAR map. Anyways,
Chris Cottrell. Yeah.
Chris Cottrell, yeah. These don't exist on. These don't exist for Mexico. You can't find, even though they've LiDAR scanned so much of Mexico, you can't find these scans anywhere. And the reason is that the value of the artifacts at these sites is, it's enormous, right? So if you just projected onto the world or made a LiDAR scan immediately accessible, or even privately accessible, it's going to spread like wildfire. And these sites will get looted like that, and they already do. So by the time that Mexican or Guatemalan archaeologists get to a lost city that they maybe knew of 50 years ago, when somebody, like a medical plane or whatever is flying over, and they go, oh, look at that. There's some giant pyramid down there. They mark it on the map, and then they know that something's out there. But 50 years later, a team finally gets there, and it's all been looted, but maybe been looted recently because there's a bunch of Gatorade bottles, laying around. And it's the cartels that are out there, they illegal logging. So they're cutting down trees, and then while they're cutting down trees, they're finding cities, or they have their own expeditions that are going out to find cities, and they just blow holes in the side of pyramids. I was at a site near El Ramonal in Campeche, Mexico, and it was a site that had already been looted. Locals maybe looting it. I don't know. I don't know if cartel did it or not, but they will. They'll cut down these trees, or they'll make these trees fall, and you'll have this big tree that grows out of the side of a pyramid. And if you cut down that tree and get it to tip over, it'll just pull out this huge part of the pyramid, and then they'll sift through that. And so it's this. I went to the site that had 16 pyramids in this, I don't know, maybe 1,000 by 1,000 yard span that we went and looked at, and every pyramid was just cratered in, looking for different artifacts. Of course, there's nothing on the surface other than pottery. So in the Americas, I mean, people are, at least in, I should say, Central America and Mexico. Yeah, it's a vicious war for, preserving archaeological sites. South America is a lot harder because, I don't know too much about like organized crime in South America as much as I'm more familiar with it in Mexico. But it doesn't seem to be as big of a problem, and it might be because the sites are even less accessible. The jungle is considerably larger in South America. So like in Peru, you still have a big looting problem when you're talking about sites that are out in the desert, like Moche culture, Nazca culture, like the Nazca lines. The Nazca have their own pyramids. They have these huge mound sites that all of them have been looted, but most of the time it's done by locals. Off in the jungles, these old ancient Inca cities, they're completely inaccessible. You have to launch like a state-sponsored expedition and send people out there for an incredibly long time just to find something like that. So South America it's not as much of a problem.
So the Russian thing, like, do you think that they're working with the cartels directly, or like, how do you think they're getting access to?
They must be.
They must be, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if I don't know how much like geopolitics or whatever you'd want to get into, but I mean, cartels are using Russian guns.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they're partnered. That's probably how they're.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's I think like mid 2023, there was something that went viral, and it was the cartels had new kits, like they were completely kitted out, and it was whatever some kind of AK-47 that they had. That's a gun expert that I follow. He said he zoomed in and he did a whole analysis of it, and he's like, this is a Russian model. So
wow. So that's so it's like a trade. Like the Russians are helping them, and then they're giving Russia the loots.
The loots and who knows what else.
Yeah, right.
A lot of stuff, I'm sure.
That's crazy, man. I had no idea.
I would say the loot is probably like a hobby. It's probably this little side thing. Yeah. There's probably many, many more lucrative things than that too.
And then, I mean, it's probably not that like Russia's selling the stuff, or do you think that Russia, so all this stuff's in a big warehouse in Russia. Like, what is Russia doing with it? Are they just like holding it and like?
I think so. Yeah. That seems to be, from the limited knowledge I know of it, it just sits in these airplane hangars in Russia, and I think it's Putin or whoever is there that's interested in it and wants to study it, and they have the means to bring it in. Morbid curiosity. Yeah.
Because it's not like they care about selling it for,
No, there's nobody else to sell it to, right?
Right. It's not like a big black market trade where it's making its way onto antiquities markets or anything. Yeah. It's like his collection of ancient. That's crazy,
exactly,
man.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, and I mean, Putin's I wouldn't say he has a value for history. He knows a lot about history. Certainly, he's an expert in Russian history. And I think anybody that's a world leader like that probably has an appreciation for like world history on a grand scale. So I would imagine that he's got resources allocated to the little side hobby of collecting ancient artifacts, Yeah,
that's crazy. Well, what else about South America? I mean, we're going to talk a lot about Egypt today. We're going to talk about vases today for sure. I know you've done a lot of really cool research on the vase topic, but in South America, so I went there in November to Peru and Cusco, the Sacred Valley, and that whole area. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today was the walls and the possibility that acid was used to shape some of the polygonal walls that exist down there, and your thoughts on that as a possibility. What are your thoughts there? I talked to Barnhart about it.
Yeah. So I think the huge polygonal walls that's really the whether they are the whether they're the andesite or the granite or even the basalt, whether it's andesite, granite, basalt, or there's even some limestone ones. But then the limestones, they can be different. Like you can have smaller cellular stones. I think that's a big mystery with the imperial stones, the ones that are more square. I think it's there's a literary source that comes from the late 1600s, and it's a man who was born in Inca, but he, I guess was colonized or whatever, and he learns to speak Spanish and marries a Spanish woman, and he ends up writing about his childhood growing up amongst the Inca, and he says something in there about he says something in his dialogue about how he would watch the Inca stonemasons, and he says something. He's like through. They had masterful skill with these metal hammers or metal tools based on unknown centuries of expertise would carve out these square imperial stones. So these little square ones, he's talking about, he was seeing them do it as a kid. However, you also have contemporaneously with him, you have these other sources that are talking about people who are observing the Inca trying to move these giant stones and failing to do it. And then there were Spaniards that were asking the local Inca, I think it's the Temple of the Moon, how did they move these stones? And then the Inca told them, well, no, these stones had always been here. They were built by the gods, something akin to that. And so the mystery there is the big cellular polygonal stones. How were those done? Were they softened by acids? I don't agree with the geopolymer thing, but I think that if it were possible to be able to take these acids that, we know that there are these acid deposits down in the Atacama Desert, and that there are these Inca or ancient South American highways that lead off. They could be Wari. They could be, the Inca built on top of the highways of the Wari Empire. The Wari may have been building on top of the highways of an older empire. But you have these roads that go all the way down into the Chilean desert and then just fade into the desert. That's kind of where they end. Well, why do they have this road that's going down there? Well, we know that there are these natural acid deposits that people were mining down there. Now, the question is, what are they doing with these acids? We don't have a lot of evidence for that, as far as I'm aware. But it seems plausible and interesting to me, the possibility of bringing those back up to, what we consider today the Inca realm. And rather than cutting and chiseling the stone away to fit perfectly with each other, well, what if you're able just to soften the edges of stones and then basically, slide them, smush them together, and that creates these perfect seams that you see. In these, I'm sure you did this as well, but every time you can get a glimpse of the spaces between the stones, almost always the stones are fitted together all the way to the back, or at least very, very closely. And on the outside, they're perfect. Yeah. So right here. I just think that the idea of them being able to soften the edges of the stones and then slide the stones together rather than having to cut them to fit together just would be such an ingenious and much more easy way to be able to construct these. How you lift the stone up 15 or 20 feet up above your head, I really don't know. That's the perennial mystery. But I agree with you, and I think that the acid idea is just so good. And you see on the exterior right here, it looks like there was acid dripping down the front of it. This front part that doesn't get pressed against another stone, it looks like there's acid that's eaten away at the front of the stone there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts is acid is the most likely explanation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think when you look at the three options, you've got acid, you've got geopolymer, and you've got hammer and chisel, basically, right? I mean, those are the only three options. And mainstream is telling us that it's hammer and chisel. And very alternative view is geopolymer. I think the geopolymer thing, if I've had one guest on the show that I think is, maybe not very credible or whatever, it would be the geopolymer episode for me. I just don't think there's anything there.
Yeah.
And just personally, and I give it just a very, very low percentage chance of being reality really anywhere. I mean, we had cement, obviously. Humans have had cement, I mean, Göbekli Tepe, there's cement use there, the, Romans, it goes back into time. But I feel like the acid thing is the most likely thing here for a number of reasons. One, I think you see it. I think you see that orange paste right there.
Yeah.
That Ryan just had on. I think that that is probably the remnants of this acid that has stuck on there, because that's not people think that just without, I don't even think it's been tested, but people think that that's lichen, but it doesn't, it doesn't come off. It's completely caked on there. And the biggest thing for me, or one of the things for me, is that when the rocks are pressed together and then one slides off of the other, you don't see tool marks on the rock. Like where they come together, there's no tool marks. It's completely flat. It's totally smooth, as if they polished the stone. And why would they polish the stone in there if I mean, it would just be so much extra effort and work to do that after you've hammered and chiseled it. You do see the hammer and chisel marks on the front of the stone a lot of times where they've flattened them off, but you don't ever see the hammer and chisel marks where they've come together. And so for me, that means it argues for the likelihood that they've been pressed together. And so I think that Ancient Architects did a great video on this that I watched prior to going down there, and thought that and they got the idea from, this is not a new idea. They got it from somebody else, a couple of decades before. And then I think that there was even a Spanish chronicler that went that has said that he saw them working with this acid when he first got there.
Yeah, there may be another example in Cusco, but I'm almost certain that there's a Spanish chronicler that refers to at Tiwanaku. There is acids being used, but Tiwanaku is basically the blueprint for, or at least archaeologists think is the blueprint for the later construction that you see at Cusco and Machu Picchu. But there may be another literary source that's more relevant to Cusco itself. Ryan, that photo that you had up there, where you were showing the joint of those blocks, I'm sure you noticed that so there was an earthquake in I think 1695, and then there's another earthquake in 1655, and then there's another one in like 1995 or something close to that. That knocked down the colonial buildings, but the ancient buildings are still standing there. But while they're doing that, it's displacing the joints of the blocks. So you can see that top block has slid back, and on that bottom stone, that outward lip is pointing up. So it looks like
it's been compressed.
Yeah, it's been compressed, and that stone, smushed down that softer, acidly, dissolved stone that's on the surface, and it smushes it down, and it makes that perfect crease there. And I honestly think that for me, that's the smoking gun of that. Okay, it literally looks like this block has been sitting on top of the other one for thousands of years or however long, and at one point the top of it was soft and it compressed it, just maybe by half an inch. I mean, that's what, and like, I'm not saying that the acid, you could dissolve and soften the stone to make it like a cinnamon roll. I just mean it softened it where it was compressed by half an inch. That for me though, that lip there is the most telling sign. And then I think that the exterior, the front of the stones, the way that they have been chipped off, and the little scoops where it looks like the stone was softened, and some of it was pulled away in the process of moving the stone or mounting the stones and putting them on there. I just think that those two pieces to me just look like the exterior of the stone was softer at one point in time.
Yeah, and I feel like whereas a couple of years ago, mainstream would have been like, this is insane. Like, you guys have lost your minds. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're absolutely crazy, and you belong on the Archaeological Wall of Shame, which, by the way, both of us have been.
Both of us have been put on it.
Yeah, put on it. So, Congratulations. That's a big accomplishment. And but I feel like people are slowly starting to come around to this idea of that acid could potentially have been what was used by ancient people whenever it was, whether it was the Aztecs or prior civilization. Like I feel like that is now becoming something that is being more, at least in the consideration set for how these were made. And but are you hearing that as well? Are you seeing that from people?
Yet? Yeah, I think like we were talking last night, is it's funny, we're kind of reaching this new stage where it's going to be interesting to see how so much of this plays out. Because we were talking about, I know this sounds like it's not going to be relevant to what you're saying, but we were talking about last night Plato's Atlantis and how there's not really a consensus, or at least maybe like an alternative community, like, well, what exactly are we talking about? Are we literally talking about Plato's Atlantis, or is it more like how you and I say, well, when somebody's referring to Atlantis, it's just a placeholder for this idea that civilization goes back further than pre-dynastic or dynastic Egypt and Mesopotamia, right? It's just a placeholder word. It's an umbrella term for that. I think that this whole rejuvenated interest in looking for these archaeological mysteries produces a lot of valuable fruit, right? And I think that slowly but surely it's going to and is inspiring new archaeologists to come in and just have, even if it's just a 25% more open mind, things are being discovered and you're seeing things in a new light, right? Rather than like the archaeologists that put us on the Wall of Shame, just shooting it down. There's no mystery, there's no intrigue, there's no romance, and even the idea of romance in archaeology is problematic, right? Like that's what they say. Because that was maybe a year ago or so, I was getting blasted on the Wall of Shame for saying that. Well, no, I'm not trying to. Me personally, I said this publicly. I was like, I'm not trying to sell mystery. What I'm doing is just conveying the romance and the wonder of the ancient world, and I'm putting on display how much I love it and how beautiful I find it and intriguing I find it. Well, then I get blasted for that because no, romance is something, that's an outdated way of viewing. So everything is just, it's so sterilized, and you and I are being chastised by people who it feels like they're so jaded by their own profession. It's like they don't even love their own profession. It's a very weird thing. And they're making themselves the unnecessary villains in this whole, in this whole sphere. But to getting what you're saying, yes, I do feel like more and more people who would maybe traditionally be placed in the academic sphere are coming around to maybe not saying they're on board with Atlantis or ancient aliens or whatever, but they're saying, oh, you know what, that is pretty interesting how these blocks were made. It is pretty interesting. Well, maybe they were softened. Maybe these people who, overshot the mark by looking for X, Y, and Z because they're seeing the evidence of, these softened stones. Well, maybe the softened stones itself is indicative of there is something more. So I think there's this middle ground that as time goes on, hopefully everybody kind of comes towards, and acknowledging that there is something more to our ancient history.
Yeah. I think you're right. I hope you're right. But there are people that are coming around, to it and trying to kind of keep an open mind about things. I think part of it is part of the issue is people's identification with their job, with their role, with their position as an authority of the information. And so when every topic comes up, they feel like it's a yes or a no.
Yeah.
It's 100% or 0%. And they don't have open minds to say this is 80% or this is 20%.
Yeah.
They say, well, this, I'm right about this, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about, it's like it's a yes or a no. It's a very there's no openness to hear other points of view. And I think that's where a lot of these guys like Dibble are unconsciously. They don't realize that's where they are. They literally think that their beliefs are true and that the things that they don't believe in are false and have 0% chance of being true. Like that's the whole problem with like just the nature of beliefs and confusing beliefs with truth and with fact. And you've got so many authorities that don't get that and continue to do that and don't operate with open minds, that it really creates separation. And like you said, they're creating a villain and they don't even know that they're creating the villain, because they're creating separation and division amongst people who are just open-mindedly attempting to explore some of these mysteries.
Yeah, I think there's something worth touching on there. Poor Flint ends up being the middle of all this because he debated Graham. It's a good example. Prefacing all of this, everybody that I know that's met Flint personally likes him. They say that he's nice, and that he's a nice guy.
Danny said that last night at dinner. Danny Jones,
exactly.
He's cool.
And personally, to me, Flint has been very nice to me. He gave me a bunch of resources for like Bronze Age archaeology. This is almost 2 years ago when I was expressing to him my interest in Greece. Gave me a bunch of resources. Spent a lot of time messaging me that he didn't have to take, and then I even talked to him about and we'll talk about this later, but this certificate program I'm doing at the University of Greece. He was one of the people that really encouraged me to take that next step. But I think that when he was on Danny Jones and Danny brings up the vases, and his first response is, "Yeah, I disagree with them."
Right.
It's like, well, Flint, come on, man.
That's
like you're not winning over anybody by saying that, And I think the thing is, at least if you're going to be involved in the public sphere, you should want to win over people, right? But maybe that's, I don't know. I'm not sure what Flint does on his day-to-day job, but maybe that's more so the skill of like an orator or a lecturer to know how to talk to people and win them over and be open-minded. I just don't know. But I think that him saying that, just that one thing, is maybe indicative of so many people on that side, like people that put you and I on the wall of shame. It's just they're just automatically opposed, and there's not a whole reason to be. You don't have to disagree. You and I talk about this. People who are, I don't even love the alternative history word, like the name for this whole space or whatever. I don't really care for that word, but because it's so ranging, right? Like I'm probably one of the most, maybe the most conservative person in this whole sphere, least willing to say, I don't know about this way out here idea, but I definitely think that these have merit. My view of Atlantis might be a lot more dialed down than someone else's, right? But we still get all thrown in the same box. And I don't know. We're just really at the forefront of like a new age. And 10 years from now, I think things will be a lot more refined. And I think the people that are in this space that have ideas that are more centered around the actual data and well thought out ideas, they will be people who are still speaking and writing and, putting out videos and talking about these topics, and the other people will have faded out. And that's the way it was in archaeology 200 years ago. In the early 1800s, you had all these archaeologists who were as pseudo-scientific or whatever as archaeologists say independent researchers are today, and then it becomes more dialed in, and then you have this golden age of archaeology, and then it kind of gets to where it is today, and so we're at like a new renaissance, right, where people are looking at things in themselves. They have all these new tools available, and it's just going to take time to go through the weeds,
Yeah, I thought Danny did a nice job of challenging his beliefs on the vases and his, they're wrong and I disagree with them, like that kind of stuff. And then his reasoning behind it, I thought Danny did a nice job of challenging that as well, because there was no logic there. And especially for somebody who's never seen one or touched a vase, it's like to feel like you're that much of an authority over people who have studied these and really actually seen them and looked at them, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to be that closed-minded to something.
Well, and there's so many instances of so archaeologists. Maybe it was last night at dinner when I was thinking about this, or I was watching Danny's episode with Flint recently. I was thinking about people like Flint, his position as a historian, as an archaeologist. These guys are arbiters and holders and like collectors of knowledge, right? Like and they're the ones that teach it to students that come in. But there's still so many other people who have specialized interest in fields that are can be closely associated with archaeology, and being open to hear those people's opinions would greater inform your view of the things that you study, right? Like, a guy who's a mechanical aerospace engineer or whatever, like Dunn and Dunn's son, who love these vases and know everything about them. Well, these guys don't spend all their time learning about the culture of the ancient Egyptians like I do, or the Greeks or whatever like I do. So I have this vast, set of knowledge here that's applicable to history, and I know the cultural context behind things, and I may know a little bit about the vases, but I can't dismiss his opinion about the vase, And I think that that's kind of the thing that I just find so strange, that that some archaeologists and it's a lot of people in a lot of industries, they just automatically dismiss something. And what I think it is it's like I think it's just the association that they don't like. One of my fears of reaching out to a local museum or something to be able to look at a vase that they have, like in San Antonio, they have a green diorite vase there. I probably sent you a photo of it, and I've thought about going to ask to go into their lab and look at it. But then, one of my fears is like, what if they look into me, they see that, I've been on these podcasts or whatever, that some people don't like me. They see this guilt by association, and they dislike me. And that's what I think a lot of this is that like, so Graham Hancock and people that like Graham Hancock are interested in the vases, I'm instantly going to oppose it. And I just think in the long run, that isn't going to do any good for anybody. And I think eventually it will die out. I think, you look at these archaeologists that are in there, that are active like on X and on YouTube, that are in their, 20s and 30s, a lot of them are more open to being a part of the conversation because they understand we have this new space that has this massive amount of dialogue. That's another thing I think is interesting is we're kind of coming out of an age where there's a clear wall, right? Like academics did not associate with the public. They existed in their own fraternities, right? And you put out magazines and stuff, and the public just kind of accepted it because there wasn't this huge discourse. But now we have like the Roman Forum, right? Where everyone can gather on X or on social media or on YouTube and discuss things and discuss things and discuss things. And there's less of a hierarchy now, So we're reaching this whole new phase of society where if you want to be involved in academia, in the same way that if you want to be involved in politics now, if you're going to go on a political campaign, you've got to come on podcast and appeal to, the vast majority of people, because now we have our own forum, or we have our own agora, like in Athens. You have this place that people come and meet and discuss. And we're just reaching this new place. And I think that for anybody to be successful in what they're doing, if they care about, being involved in the public, they've got to learn like the skill of oratory, something that used to be so important in ancient times, I love this. I love this conversation right here. This is something I think about a lot, this place that we're in right now, and thinking about what is our little space going to look like 10 years from now?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's interesting, fascinating, and hopefully it gets more open.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully it
has to. Look at. I was thinking about this a minute ago. I mean, look at your podcast studio. 50 years ago, this isn't possible to do this. It's not possible to project your voice out. And this, whether gatekeepers of knowledge or academics or whatever like it or not, this is the place that the world is in. And this, I just think it's so cool.
Yeah, true. Well, you've been doing a lot of work on the vase topic over the last year. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so I was trying to remember where I even got started on this. So I've had an interest in ancient Greece my whole life. And when I announced that I was going to this continuing education certificate program at the University of Athens, a lot of people were shocked that it felt like I was stepping away from the Americas. But I stepped away from the classics to study the Americas. That's, anybody that's heard me on podcasts, my very first interest was ancient Greece. It was the movie Troy. It was the ancient biblical world. Reading the Iliad and the Odyssey as a little kid, as little as I could comprehend of it. And so, eventually this just started creeping back in as I got older. And, and my bachelor's degree is in anthropology. And what that is the study of or it's ancient cultural anthropology. So it's the study of ancient people, right? So my preference of study, what I like to dig into, is not necessarily the hard artifacts of these vases or how are the pyramids made. For me, the interesting idea is, okay, what can I learn about people at the time that these vases were made and their relationship to the vases? What can I learn about the people at the time of the pyramids and their relationship to the pyramids? So one of the things I find really interesting there is there's this little village that existed on the Mahdi outcrop. And during the construction of the Menkaure pyramid complex, that village was displaced and those people were moved out of the way to build the Valley Temple. And you can see the archaeological evidence, like the upheaval of this village, and all their trash gets dumped in the desert. And you can go rummage through that trash and learn things about those people. I find that really interesting. And that can go endlessly deep. And so that was one of the pulls to me for Greece, because you can study Greece from so many different angles, right? It's this deeply human civilization. And I think that's why I constantly say with the Americas, it's like we're studying aliens, right? Because they're so different from the Western mindset. And also, we don't have literature. And literature brings out the human aspect. Otherwise, you're dealing with public propaganda. So the dilemma that we have with studying the Maya is the same dilemma that we have with studying the Egyptians, in that we look at them the way they wanted to be looked at. Their propaganda worked, and it worked for all of eternity, because when you think about it, Egyptians, you think of the pharaohs, you think of the timeless pharaohs up on the walls. We can only view them the way they wanted to be viewed, as these semi-divine, more than human people, right? And so it gives this degree of separation, and that's where you get this intense fascination with them, because they're so different from us. But then also, as somebody who loves just daily life in the ancient world, the Greeks are compelling too, because you can get so deep into learning about ancient people and what the visceral part of just normal life was like. And so that had been creeping in for maybe like 5 years now. And I never talked about it in a public sphere, because Greece is, it's so detailed, it's so nuanced, there's so much going on. I said this in a video recently that, with Egypt, you're limited to, and there's lots of nuance in it, but you're limited to the study of bones, pottery, and other smaller artifacts, and buildings, whether it's the pyramids or temples or whatever. But with Greece, you have this added element of literature, and that is incredibly vast. And there's so many sources to bounce back and forth from. And also learning the language is such an intense part of being an expert in Greece. So I never talked about it publicly, because it's too nuanced for me to talk about. But as a hobby, I had been looking into it. And somewhere along the way, I was going through Google Earth through a museum in Athens, and then another one in Crete. Now, so you have several different ages of Greek history. Two biggest ones are the classical period, the height of Athenian democracy, the Peloponnesian War against Sparta and Athens. But then you have this older age, the Age of Heroes, the end of the Bronze Age, which is where the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Trojan War, takes place during this time. That's also a deep fascination of mine. For like probably so many people throughout the last 3,000 years, that's been most people's first fascination with history. And so where this mainly takes place is in the Peloponnese and on the island of Crete. This is where the Minoan civilization existed. And the two major players in the late Bronze Age is you have two cultures. You have the Minoan culture and you have the Mycenaeans.
And when was what year? What years?
This is anywhere from let's give it rough numbers, 2000 to 1000 BC. Okay. More accurately, maybe like 1800 to 1200 BC. And then you have these like frays at the beginning where it's building and where it's falling. And so, these are major players in the ancient world. And but there are these lost civilizations, basically, that all we have left are the ruins. They didn't leave us literature. And the literature that they left us is very limited. This is the mystery of linear A and B, which are basically just, they're like ledgers for keeping up with goods and things like that. But I find these civilizations very interesting. I find the Minoans really, really interesting. So you have the city of Mycenae. This is probably important to know. You have the city of Mycenae, which is in the Peloponnese, and this is the major Bronze Age superpower in Greece, led by, if you've seen the movie Troy, you know the king Agamemnon. Well, he's the king of Mycenae, and he leads this huge campaign where he essentially, as the story goes, unites all the kingdoms of Greece into this empire, and they launch this war against Troy. Now, Troy, that the famous reason behind this is that Helen of Sparta leaves with one of the princes of Troy and goes off to Troy, and so they launch this war to go get her back. But if there really is a Trojan War, which I think there probably really was one, it was probably actually for access to the Black Sea, because Troy controlled the port from the Aegean to the Black Sea. And so if you get access to the Black Sea, you get all of the agriculture that's there. And of course, Crimea, like in Ukraine, that place has been, like the Garden of Eden for producing grain in the ancient world for thousands of years, and even all the way up to today. So that's probably what it's really about. And so I was just fascinated with these civilizations and wanted to learn more about them. And what I always do is I will drop down into Google Earth Street View inside of a museum, and I'll walk through the museum. And at the museum in Athens, in the Mycenaean section, there are these Egyptian vases that are there. And there's also vases that look like they're like pseudo-Egyptian vases. You can tell it's pretty similar, but it's weirdly different. Like some of them, I'm sure you've seen the ones that have a little spout coming out the end. Yeah, that's something that the Greeks are adding on to the vases. And sometimes it's literally just like a little stone addition that's tied to the vase and then wrapped around the rim, and then they drill a hole there and you can pour the vase, right? And then I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Like, what the heck are the Mycenaeans doing with these Egyptian vases? Okay, that's weird. So this is roughly 1500 BC. Do they know the Egyptians? So that led me down this rabbit hole, and this is maybe about a year ago this started. So then, the twin civilization or the sister civilization of the Mycenaeans is the Minoan culture. That's on Crete, which is just this island in southern Greece, in the Mediterranean or at the bottom of the Aegean. And the Minoan civilization is this very attractive, literally and figuratively, civilization that builds these huge, enormous 3 or 4 story palaces. They have all these really interesting, beautiful murals on their walls. Their women are supposedly like the most beautiful women that have ever existed. You can look at their murals and it's like, wow, that's a pretty lady. And they've got these sports of them like jumping over bulls, and there's even theater and ancient games, and you can just tell it's like proto-classical Greece, pre-Olympics sports that are going on. It's a fascinating culture. Certainly filthy rich. And they have this, another thing that's alluring about them is the eruption of Thera and the destruction of the city of Akrotiri, it's like Bronze Age Pompeii, and it's Santorini. And so the volcano erupts in about, I think it's 1650 BC, and just levels this city. And a lot of people think that this might be the origin. This might be the kernel of truth that we find from Plato's Atlantis of this civilization, this advanced Minoan civilization collapsing or being destroyed by this cataclysmic event. And oh wow, yeah. So that's so this is a depiction of I forget what city that is. That might be the city of Akrotiri. Those are some of the palaces. So you have Minoan civilization. At the very least, it's hurt, and the city of Akrotiri is completely destroyed by the 4th largest volcanic eruption in known history.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is about 1650 BC. It was such an incredible event that it disrupted like all the weather patterns nearby, and even Chinese dynasties recorded not recorded the event as though they knew it was a volcano, but it affected the weather in China, and these the Chinese dynasties recorded this event. So that's a very interesting thing. It's got that similar lore to Pompeii of the city just being like frozen in time in a way, or a cultural layer of the city being frozen in time, because eventually people go back and build back on top of it. But incredibly advanced, incredibly elaborate, wealthy civilization existing on the islands of Greece. And so I start just studying about it for fun. And when I'm going through their museum, I notice, whoa, there's a lot of pre-dynastic Egyptian vases in this museum, or at least things that look like it. That's really interesting. And this came from when I was working at my 9 to 5. I would take up all my company time researching Minoan civilization. That was a good time. So I end up finding this collection from 1965. Ryan, you can pull it up. There's this private collection that exists on Crete, and I don't include the guy's name because I don't want to evoke his family or whatever in this. So these are what at least he thought were specimens of actual Egyptian vases that were found on Crete. And there are others, but I just thought that these are some of the best ones. So on the left here, you've got this Egyptian diorite vase. In the middle, it doesn't say, but that looks like granite to me. It looks like your OG vase. It's so finely polished. It looks like it'd be translucent. And on the right, you have this bowl. I don't know how big this bowl is. As far as I know, these artifacts these are in a private collection. I don't think they're actually on display, although I would like to go to Crete and find out someday. So I found this really interesting because it's this mystery of, okay, so you look at, and maybe you've seen this diagram before, where they show the provenance of where these vases, where we know that these pre-dynastic hard stone vessels have been found. And right about 3100 BC, according to, the archaeological record, right about 3100 BC, when the first dynasty is created, Dynasty 0, it ends. There's no more of these vases being made. From then on, from 3100 BC to 2100 BC, we see them increasingly and then drastically less being buried in royal tombs. And by the end of the Old Kingdom, there are no more people being buried with these. You may have seen this graph that somebody put together doing this research. After 2100 BC, according to the record, there shouldn't be any more of these vases laying around. They should all be underground in tombs. There are no more, at least for the most part. So where are these vases coming from? Because these appear in Crete and in the late Bronze Age Greek world, about 1,000, just under 1,000 years after the time they disappear from the archaeological record in Egypt. So I found that compelling. Like, okay, so maybe obvious answer is these are treasured artifacts in the Egyptian world that they're using as gifts to give to, neighboring cultures. I don't know how they end up there. But the next thing I thought was interesting is that the Minoans thought that these were so amazing that they try to recreate them in their own local stone. Now the Minoans, I may have it up here. Yeah. So they're limited to their local stones, which is serpentine, alabaster, limestone, and soapstone. And here are a few, but there are many, 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 many more that exist of these specimens of the Minoans trying to recreate these vases out of their own local stone. And I found this very interesting. And so I just kept looking into it. Okay, well, what is the relationship between the Egyptians and the Minoans? Clearly, there's something going on here. And clearly, the Minoans are fascinated by the Egyptians. And so this is where it gets really, really dense. Starting off on a couple side points. Right around...
So just before you go into that, there's no hard stones then that they weren't able to they didn't have access to hard stones to be able to recreate them in hard stone?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
They're I mean, maybe there is granite and diorite on the island of Crete. I would imagine that there is, but the Minoans weren't using it. Yeah, they didn't have the tools or the expertise to be able to craft these out of them. So these are made out of stones that are half as hard or soft. So these are specimens that are created by the Minoans. So I started researching the relationship between the Minoans and the Egyptians. Clearly, there is one. Whereas in the mid 1900s, it was actually basically a closely held opinion that there really wasn't much of a relationship between the cultures at all, and that Minoan culture is completely independent of Egyptian culture. It's not inspired by it or anything like that. And there are even some records of archaeologists writing to Hans Wunderlich, who has this book called The Secret of Crete, and basically writing to him with exactly the same sort of attitude that we're talking about now. This is like in the 60s, saying there's absolutely no evidence of, cross-cultural contamination, whatever. And but yet clearly there is. So when I was going around when I was going around Egypt in the last few months, there is some compelling ideas that I still need to look into in the future. But during the Amarna period, so this is at the end of the 18th dynasty, right? Probably let's call it roughly 1300 to 1400 BC. During the Amarna period, you have this pharaoh who is formally born Amenhotep IV, changes his name to Akhenaten. You've probably heard of this guy before. He basically just cuts the legs out from under the Theban priests and just levels all of the priesthood and makes himself the high priest of the one true sun god. And
he's a cone head, right?
Yeah. The way he's depicted in statues and everything, and his family members as well. They have the elongated skulls. During this time,
apologies if conehead's derogatory. Elongated skull guy. Yeah.
Well, hopefully, there's no coneheads watching that are offended.
Right. Right.
But so during this time, there's like an artistic liberation. Now, it's only it's not. It's noticeable, but it's not like the artwork completely changes. But there are palatial floors that have these designs, which, as far as we know, are completely foreign to the rest of Egyptian history. And the Egyptologist that I was with when we were in the Cairo Museum, there's an Amarna period. Amarna period is Akhenaten's little kingdom that he establishes when he changes, the whole Egyptian world and flips it on his head to worship the Aten. That's the Amarna period. And we call that because he moves the capital of Egypt from the economic capital from Memphis and the religious capital from Thebes or Luxor to a place called Tel El Amarna, which is the modern name for it, but we just call it the Amarna period. One of his palace floors or one of his palatial floors is this completely foreign art style. And the Egyptologists that I were with, they were like, this is Minoan artwork. And there's this kind of, I was surprised to hear it. There's this commonly held idea, which I can't find anywhere online, but all the Egyptologists I spoke with in Egypt agreed that during Akhenaten's reign, maybe even before it, there were Minoan artists that were being pulled into Egypt to create art pieces, and maybe they were doing other things as well. And then I would tell them, well, there's these really nice pre-dynastic vases that end up in Crete, and of course, the Egyptologists they weren't aware of this. But I was like, how do you think that they get there? And then they were like, I don't know, maybe a gift or maybe a part of, maybe it's the pharaoh showing appreciation back or whatever. But clearly the Minoans are taking these things home with them, and they're fascinated by them. And there's so much more that I could go on with how Egyptian and Minoan culture can be connected, but I think everybody watching here thinks it's pretty obvious. Ryan, if you go to that Lotus Vase, this is something I found really interesting when I was going through them, this is the most famous specimen, but I've seen at least 4 or 5 others of these Minoan bowls. This is made out of locally sourced serpentine stone from Crete. So this was not made in Egypt and brought back to Crete. This is they think anywhere from 1700 to 1450 BC. And what it is it's thought that this is a mortar and pestle bowl that has the Egyptian lotus leaves on the side of it. And this was the inception of this fascination I've had with this lotus flower. Like, what is the purpose of this flower? And why are they depicting it on this stone? Because it's very much a Greek thing to be. Okay, so the Egyptians, let's look at these vases. This is like the Apple of the ancient world, right? Apple is very sleek, very elegant, very minimalistic, very subtle. And the Egyptians are very subtle people. You go from pre-dynastic Egypt with these vases. You look at vases later on in Egyptian history. They're all very minimalistic and subtle. You look at Egyptian tomb wall art. It's very stoic. It's very eternal. It's not overly flamboyant. They're just these subtle, minimalistic people who their whole purpose in life is reaching for eternity. Everything about Egypt is eternal. Look at their statues. They're standing like this. Sometimes they're striding forward. It's this eternity that they're evoking and reaching towards. And even Greek philosophers identified that as well, that's what the Egyptian mindset was. But the Greeks, the Minoans as well, if you go look at Minoan wall art or murals, it's very much them taking place, picking flowers or participating in parties or jumping over bulls or hanging out together. It's very Greek. And even the Greeks later on kind of go back and embrace this, glorifying the beauty of their life in the now, if that makes sense. And so when you look at Greek pottery later on during the classical period, the pottery, sometimes the pots will show you what is being used, like if they're drinking wine out of this vase or whatever, they'll have a depiction of a symposium around the vase and people are hanging out and drinking wine. It's like sometimes the Greeks will just display on a vessel what the vessel is used for, right? And so I looked at this and I was like, okay, is that the Minoans literally showing us that this is a mortar and pestle bowl used for grinding up the lotus flower to be used in something? And this is where this fascination began for me. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized how polarizing that area of research is. Because the big mystery here is that the ancient Egyptian lotus flower does not exist anymore. They used them so much and they were so popular that they went completely extinct.
Wow.
Now we have modern lotus flowers. The Maya had a blue lotus flower. Now there's a difference between the blue water lily and the lotus flower. The water lily is a lily. The lotus flower is a lotus flower, and they're completely different, but they look so similar. But the lotus flower does not exist anymore in Egypt. You also have them in India, and you have them maybe in Japan, and then in Mexico and in Egypt. Those are the places on the world that they're grown. But the species are all slightly different. The Egyptian lotus flower was its own unique thing that doesn't exist anymore. We have evidence of them, though, organic evidence, because they will be essentially mummified and stored in a tomb. And then you can go find like the crusted up petals of a lotus flower, and then they put them in like the little glass display, and they're kept in laboratories where they can be examined. And the last time I know that one was examined is maybe in the 90s, and they compared it to the modern day lotus flower. I don't know where this modern day lotus flower came from, either in the Americas or India, but there was like a 15% difference in the DNA of the flowers, and it was something about that 15% difference that actually would. I wish I could explain the chemicals behind it, but that 15% difference was a drastic difference. So anyways, the research that we know as far as what the Egyptians were using the lotus flower for is numerous and bountiful, but yet scant and hard to interpret. So all around ancient Egypt, man. Ryan, I sent you some photos of it's not in this folder, but in the other one. All around Egypt, dude. When you go, just look for the lotus flower. You're gonna see it everywhere. So I think that this is in the Temple of Seti. This is outside the Osirion. Okay, so there's lotus flower too. So you see the lotus flower at the top of these. You see them open and closed. So do you see right here at the bottom in the middle, you see that closed lotus flower column, and to the left of that, you see the open lotus flower column. So you see these columns everywhere, and the column is like, look at the column itself as the stem of the flower, and it's blooming up into the temple ceiling. Now, a lot of temple ceilings, it's the night sky, and so part of me wonders if I've wondered, just from coming from the Maya world, and in the Maya world, everything is so symbolic and so deeply meaningful, and there's nothing that's wasted space. Everything is conveying a message to you. When I was in Egypt and I was talking about these columns, there was an Egyptologist there, and I was explaining to her, some of my expertise comes from studying Latin America, where everything is so symbolic and deep, and everything has a meaning. What do you think behind that? And she told me, she was like, don't Mayanize this, just appreciate it. And I was like, are you kidding?
I'm not much of a thinker. Translation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I had thought that surely there is some kind of deep meaning behind the columns, the top of the columns either being a closed or a blooming lotus flower, and then the column itself is essentially symbolic of the stem of the flower, or sometimes it's symbolic of like a wrapping of different offerings, like you can see on this closed one, they're wrapped together. Okay, so on the left, that comes from the Temple of Seti, just outside the Osirion, and all around the Egyptian world, you're going to see these offering scenes where it's the pharaoh giving an offering to Amun or whatever god is in front of him, and on that offering, there's going to be this little stand. There's going to be a vase of some kind, and then it's going to be the lotus flower. You'll have one that's open. You'll have two that are closed, and sometimes there'll be a papyrus flower there as well. Sometimes they're either draped over the vase or they're coming out of the vase, and you're going to see this everywhere, all over the Egyptian world. And so one of the polarizing things is the interpretation of, well, what is this flower being used for? What is it being used for? Well, we found these pornographic images before, where you see people performing, all kinds of interesting and complicated positions, and they're all sniffing of the lotus flower. They've got the lotus flower coming off the top of their head. They're using the lotus flower, in these parties, and so one of the interpretations here has been, and the research has shown from using the lotus flowers and the chemicals that are in them. Ryan, wow, you pulled that up fast. Holy crap.
Yeah, he already had this one. Ryan already had that.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just messing with you, Ryan.
Yeah,
wow.
So that's funny. Okay, so go to my paper, Ryan.
I don't think we can show that on the final broadcast, by the way. We might have to blur some things out. But
hey, man, art is art. Wow, that's okay. Yep.
So I think you'll really love when I get to the end of painting this picture. This is a deeply profound element of Egyptian society that I've never seen anybody talk about, but it takes a little while to build up to it. All right, so Blue Lotus effects, if you go to that. So this is like a synthesized, hyper simplistic version of the paper that I'm writing.
We didn't build that up. We just jumped right in with that.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. No foreplay on that. We went straight to it.
Right.
All right. So the most definitive ancient use is that it's agreed widely to have been used during religious rituals and sexual enhancement because of the presence of apomorphine. That's what I wanted to get at. So apomorphine is something that is used in modern day Viagra. And there was a research team that was working in Egypt in the late 90s, and they produced this documentary that I named my paper after. That's aptly called The Flower That Seduced Egypt. And basically at the end of this research, they deduced that the thing that they can find the best evidence for right now, technology is much more limited 30 years ago than today, and nobody's picked this research up since then. Is the most definitive thing that they can find evidence for that the Egyptians could have been using it for is sexual enhancement and like vigor, right? And I found that really interesting. But they also, hypothesized the idea that it could have been used. It could have. There's elements about the flower that could be used for like preserving youth and health, but also the psychedelic aspects of it is. It's a fact that the fruit of the all right. So the fruit of the lotus flower. It's a fact that the chemical that produces, when consumed in a moderate amount, whether you're distilling it in and you can in the leaves as well, but also the fruit. If you distill it and age it and put it in wine, which wine would have been consumed in Greece, also in Egypt, but in Egypt they're also brewing beer. If you smoke it in moderate amounts, it will have a mild psychedelic effect. It'll be like if you took a couple puffs of a blunt or something like that. You'd get this kind of soothing feeling. You'd feel a little bit better. And then it consumed in high amounts, like with anything, it's going to have a profound effect. It's going to have a strong effect. Probably similar, what I've seen it described as is it would probably be more similar to or consuming cannabis. But there's an ancient source that attests to this. And it says, so I'm just going to read this verbatim. So Odysseus visits the land of lotus eaters. This is in the Odyssey, written by Homer in the Dark Ages, probably somewhere around 800 BC, likely the island of Jerba off the coast of Tunisia. So this is Odysseus speaking here, but Homer writing. He says, they started at once and went out among the lotus eaters. Now this is his expedition around the Mediterranean, trying to get back home to his family in Greece. So they started at once. They went about among the lotus eaters, who did them no hurt, but gave them to eat the lotus, which was so delicious that those who ate of it left off caring about home and did not even want to go back and say what happened to them, but were for staying and munching on lotus with the lotus eaters without thinking further of their return. Nevertheless, though they wept bitterly, I forced them back into the ships and made them fast under the benches. Then I told the rest to go on board at once, lest any of them should taste of the lotus and leave off wanting to go home. So they took their places and smote the gray sea with their oars. So he visits the land of the lotus eaters. And basically what it's saying here is that whoever was eating the fruit of the lotus, which is at the core of the lotus flower. The lotus flower does not grow in Tunisia. It grows on the Nile. Whoever was eating that enjoyed it so much that they just stopped caring about anything, right? It's kind of like the stigma that we have against like potheads. Like, you smoke weed all the time, you're just not going to care about anything. You start doing drugs, you're not going to care about anything. So there's a lot of people who interpret this as, oh, okay, this is not just like they're eating zebra cakes and they're getting fat and just enjoying it and they don't want to go anywhere because it's so delicious. This is having some kind of effect on them that is affecting their psychedelic state and making them not care about going home, which was the whole mission that they're on, is trying to get back to Western Greece. And so I found this really interesting, and I thought, okay, is there any archaeological evidence that we can attest to that the lotus would actually be in Tunisia or on the coast of Tunisia? Well, yes, Phoenician trade routes. The Phoenicians around this period, this is the late Bronze Age, that the Odyssey takes place. There are Phoenician trade routes going all around the Mediterranean, and so you have Phoenicians that may be stopping in the Nile Delta where the lotus grows in abundance, acquiring these lotus and then going around on their trade routes. And so, is this some very scant, only remaining evidence of the fact that the lotus was a hot commodity, not only in Egypt, where it's clearly being consumed in abundance because it's on every single temple wall, in every tomb wall, everywhere, but also it's popular in the Mediterranean. So there's something really profound about this flower. So I say trade routes connecting ancient Tunisia to Egypt through Phoenician trade routes are well established. Could bundles of the Egyptian lotus have been a regular trade item? ? I say by the 5th century BC, the Greek traveler Herodotus was certain that the lotus eaters still existed off the east coast of Libya near Egypt. So that's really interesting. So it's almost 1,000 years later. Is there anything below that, Ryan? Oh wow. Okay. So Herodotus says a promontory jutting out into the sea from the country of the Jindanis is inhabited by the lotus eaters, who live entirely on the fruit of the lotus tree. The lotus fruit is about the size of the lentisk berry and in sweetness resembles the date. The lotus eaters even succeed in obtaining it from a sort of wine. So there, it's the lotus being mixed and aged into the wine and being consumed that way, and clearly having some kind of profound effect on them. That's why they're so famous. And that's the other thing is okay. A population of a bunch of fat people gorging themselves on cake is not really attested to in the historical record. There was something even more particular about those people that is worth preserving in history, right? That can get kind of muddy because, we are talking about the Odyssey, which is a historical fiction that's written around 800 BC about events that took place somewhere around 400 years earlier. But there's all kinds of things in Homer's writing where we have evidence of the fact that he's using real peoples and places as part of his historical narrative. But that doesn't mean that Agamemnon, Menelaus, Helen of Sparta, Achilles, Hector, you can go Andromache. It doesn't mean any of those people actually existed. But Troy, Mycenae, Sparta, Ithaca, these are all real people and places. And so that can be, the Lotus Eaters could have been something that's famous around the Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean, that there's this place where these people are constantly getting high, So Egyptian origins of Minoan civilization and religion. So this is a little side note here. So many archaeologists and historians, including Sir Arthur Evans himself. Now, this is the man who, quote unquote, discovered Minoan civilization. He's really the guy that bought the land that the Palace of Knossos on Crete exists. They knew that something was there, and they knew that it may be related to this famous king Minos. So he buys it, he discovers it, and he believed or proposed that either A, Minoan religion was derivative of Egyptian religion and Minoan society was largely inspired by Egypt, or B, the Minoans were Egyptian colonists who continued to pay back tribute to the pharaoh until the Bronze Age collapse. And I put the former is probably the more accurate one, that Minoan religion may have been derivative of Egyptian religion and that society may have been inspired by Egypt. I think that one's probably more true, even though they have so many peculiarities.
So the lotus flower then went completely gone in Egypt, so it's not there today. And so what we're talking about is how they would have used it back in the day prior to it going away. Whether or not they eradicated it, whether or not they made a decision to actually go in and pull up every plant to get rid of these lotus eaters and to get rid of this quote unquote drug, or whether or not they just got high off their supply and ran out is, I guess, kind of an unknown.
That's
probably,
an unknown, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So there's that, but then there's also lotus flowers that exist in different parts of the world, which you mentioned, and so those lotus flowers, though, from a DNA standpoint, are 15+% different than these lotus flowers. Are the lotus flowers that exist today? Can those be used as drugs?
Yes,
they can. They can.
They can be. But the limited research that's been done is that they're even more mild. They think it'd be even more mild than the ones that were on the Nile.
Okay. Got it. So we really don't know the extent of how of the effects of the lotus flower, of what it had on the lotus eaters and on the Egyptian people themselves.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So I say all that to say that
that's crazy. By the way, this is crazy.
Yeah. So we
really cool.
So we have scant evidence all the way around, but highly likely that the chemicals that are in the lotus flower, people are using it to get horny. They're using it in these sex parties. They're using it as like a sexual stimulant, and that the people off the coast of Tunisia that Odysseus met, according to the story, it was having some kind of effect on them that was making them not care about anything. So it has this sort of multi-purpose thing. Also, the researchers in the 90s proposed that it had properties that would help preserve your youthfulness. And there's another source that attests to this. I think that's probably worth bringing up right now. Okay, so Ryan, I sent you a photo that it's a little bit blurry, and it is it's some hieroglyphs that are on a temple wall. There's no lotus flower actually depicted in the photo. There you go. All right, so this is on a Ptolemaic temple. I believe it is the Temple of Edfu, and there's a British archaeologist who translated this, and essentially one part that we're taking from this is I believe it's Ptolemy the 10th. This is a Greek pharaoh ruling during the Greek dynasties. So you have the Ptolemaic dynasties, which is the last chapter. I believe this goes from let's start with Alexander. So 332 to 30 BC. So about 302 years of this dynasty. It begins with Alexander. It ends with Cleopatra's death. This is Ptolemy the 10th, I believe. That's his hand. He's holding this.
Got a funky hand.
Holding this scepter. Yeah. Greek Egyptian art gets real funky. Like they have these pudgy like spaghetti arms and then like the real elegant Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom Egyptian artwork, wall art is completely gone. It's like this weird phase, and the hieroglyphs get very, very complicated. But we get a really interesting anecdote here, where on this wall, Ptolemy says he's essentially he's giving an offering of the lotus flower to the god Amun, and he tells Amun, he's like describing the experience of the lotus flower, and he says when you take of the lotus flower and when you sniff of it, you take of it, your mind expands and your eyes become imbued with dynamic properties. That's the direct translation. And then it goes on to talk about like the holy aspects of the flower. And I was like, your mind expands and your eyes become imbued with dynamic properties. Wow. So we're having it. It's affecting the psychological state. It's affecting, clearly, when you're high, you get a little bit loopy. And then it also has this vigor aspect to it. So it's making you like sexually strong. It's having the psychological effect on you. It's having a visual effect on you as well. This is like a drug that's doing quite a lot. And then it got even deeper. Ryan, if you go back to my paper.
It seems like science should be able to bring this back.
Ah, man, I know, right?
We ought to be able to mess around and really see what was going on.
Okay, so Egypt and the lotus. Let's go back 12,000 years to the first Egyptians that are arriving, that we know of, that are arriving in the Dakhla Oasis. They're migrating in from the Greater Sahara. The Sahara is drying up. People are moving to the Mediterranean coast. They're moving to the Atlantic coast. They're moving down into the Congo or in the savannas today. They only have a few options. But there's also this option of this really fertile yet congested Nile Valley off to the east. And so, anywhere from 12,000 years ago to just 6,000 years ago, people are moving into the Nile. And this is probably worth touching on. This is why the deeper I've gotten into this, the more I think like, okay, there's an interesting argument here that I've never seen an academic make. These are ideas that I've come up with myself. It's kind of like I look at ancient Egypt like New York City. You have this huge influx of people arriving in this new land. You have New York City, which for whatever reason is this limited amount of space where everything is happening. And something like that with all that energy and all that investment is either destined to fall or it's destined to be greatness, right? The Nile is sort of similar to that. As the Sahara is drying up, you have all these people who are pushed into this small, compacted area. You can't have miles and miles and miles to take your cattle around and feed it all this random grass and set up camp everywhere and just, live off of the land. You have to form a sedentary lifestyle, and people are packed on top of each other. So that's either destined to fail miserably or be an enormous success. Maybe a success so great in such a fertile place that it creates a civilization that's powerful enough to create the world's largest structures before human history and other civilizations are even doing anything. They're all, around the ancient world, everybody else, for the most part, are still cavemen when the pyramids are being built at the pyramid's youngest date, And so I just find that fascinating. But so you have Egyptians arriving in Egypt, and one of the first things that they would notice as they're going down to the Nile all throughout the day is they would have noticed this flower. So I write, the Egyptian blue lotus rises from the depths of the Nile, blooms to worship the sun, and descends back into the river every single day. That flower emerges from the primordial water to worship the sun and then goes back under every single day. There's something divine about that separates itself from all the other plant species that these ancient people would have ever noticed. So they would have seen something divine about this. I was talking to Ryan about this last night. This is the pious chapter of human history where, when we were talking about, I see when people talk about vases, what is the common saying that some people use when they say, the precision indicates purpose or there's something.
Function.
The precision indicates function. Well, the only issue that I would take with that is in the 5th century BC.
Or the tool that was used to create it a lot of times.
Sure.
Say, yeah.
So the only issue I would take with that is we're dealing with a different chapter in humanity going back this far. And it's really at the 5th century BC when the Greek philosophers like Socrates, he starts telling the people, telling all the young people around the Agora, if the Greek gods really do exist, they're far away. I don't even know if they exist, honestly. But here's what I do know. Here's how we can control our lives and make our lives better in this day. The Athenian court did not like that at all. That is the age when the first domino gets pushed down and we start getting towards this Western mindset of function, right? Like before ancient Greece, gears didn't exist. Gears are a very Western thing, like technology, right? It's kind of the same thing when we talk about the Mayan calendar. The Maya calendar gets put into, makes it look like there's these gears that rotate together. I'm sure you've seen before. The Maya didn't view it that way because they didn't have gears. It's ingrained in us, functionality. We are an impious people. We don't, most of us, 50% of us at least, don't believe or know for certainty that there's any God out there. We have a very Socratic approach. We're like, well, if God's really out there, he's far away and distant. It doesn't have a lot to do with our lives, but here's what we can do to control our lives. That began in Athens in the 5th century. Everything before that is a very pious people. Everything they did was holy, right? So that's, as a little side note, that's one of the things I would say. I was telling Ryan, I was like, I don't know. And to my Western mind, it sounds disappointing to say it, but I just wonder if like the perfection of the vases isn't because the vase themselves is holy in some way. It has to be perfect. It's for the god or whatever, We're just dealing with people that are so different than us, and they exist on the other chapter of humanity where life is based about the gods. So, all right. So getting back to this, so Egyptians would have noticed this lotus cycle as being a clearly divine cycle as far back we know as at least 12,500 BC when the first ancestors of the dynastic Egyptians arrived in the Dakhla oasis. Now, you had people in Egypt long before that. We have bodies that are 30,000 years old, but people really, really start arriving, we can detect, around 12,500 years ago. People start arriving in Egypt and arriving and staying. Sometimes people would arrive and then people would die or they'd move on to somewhere else, but these people were staying.
Is that considered the beginning of pre-dynastic? Or is that like 10,000? Or
yeah, I think the beginning of pre-dynastic Egypt, they only put that's pretty recent. It's like 4,000 BC. So, but these people that are arriving like in the Dakhla oasis, when we find their bodies and burials, they have the same genetic makeup as dynastic people. So these are people who are arriving in Egypt and they're not leaving. But we have other bodies of people 30,000 years ago that have nothing in common with Egyptians. And so we think that these were people who arrived and then most of them left, but this dude died here, so he got buried, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, whatever we want to label the people, there's been people in this part of the world probably, I mean, we know 30,000 years because there's bodies, but probably for, 1 million years, bro.
I think that...
it's just it would have been such a fertile and beautiful place to live where food would have been abundant along the Nile. It's just a great, the Fertile Crescent.
Right, exactly. So I think that definitely it's a beautiful place to live and always was, even when the Sahara is green. And you would have had people living there, but they weren't forced to stay there. So they leave, right? Like we have evidence of Homo erectus, this cousin of us Homo sapiens that were living there as well. And then you have these semi-nomadic people that we can tell they would set up camp in one place, and then 100 years later we see evidence of them in another place, but they're not at the old place. So there's not two contemporaneous locations, and then they disappear from the archaeological record. So they just left Egypt because there's more green area somewhere else. But as the Sahara is drying up, you can only live along the Nile. That's this, 500-yard strip of land on the east, 500-yard strip of land on the west. That's this incredibly fertile oasis. We have this idea of Egyptians living in the desert. They didn't live in the desert. They lived in the fertile oasis on the green Nile, walking on grass every single day.
Right.
These were filthy rich people.
Yeah.
So they would have noticed this sacred cycle of this blue lotus going up and down. And this lotus becomes basically the central image of Egyptian society. It's on all their columns. It becomes the very symbol of life itself in ancient Egypt. It's symbolic of life. There's an interpretation that sometimes when they have the lotus up to their nose or when they have the lotus blooming hanging over their head, it means the person's alive. But when the lotus is hanging over their head and it's closed, it means that the person has died. It seems like the lotus permeates all aspects of Egyptian society, and it has multiple effects on you when you consume it, maybe depending on how you consume it as well. And it's like this wonder drug. And it has a sacred element about it where it rises every single day to worship the sun. The Egyptians are a sun-worshiping cult. That's what they do. That's why all their tombs are on the west side of the Nile, because the sun is born in the east and it dies in the west. So, the saying that we have when people die, when they say, oh, they've gone west, well, we get that from the Egyptians. So they're a sun-worshiping culture. Everything is about the sun for the Egyptians, and they're watching this flower worship the sun too. And then the flower becomes the very symbol of life, death, resurrection, okay? Ryan, pull up a satellite image of Egypt. This is the part where it gets spooky. Is the very makeup of the part of Egypt is alive is in the shape of a lotus flower.
That's cool.
How much more fitting could it be?
Yeah.
And in the Nile Delta, where that flower is blooming, that's where all of the lotus flowers grew in abundance.
Really?
Was in that delta.
Wow.
So the Nile itself, and
you see it immediately.
The Nile itself is the single most unique makeup of a country in the entire world. And it is symbolic. Not only is the flower itself symbolic of ancient Egypt, is the symbol of Egypt that the Egyptians used to identify themselves. They may not even have realized, but it was by some divine appointment that the landscape itself is in the shape of a flower. And that flower blooms out into the Mediterranean. And all of these cultures around the Mediterranean are influenced by this culture. It's this, I would be very slow to ever say that I think that the Egyptians knew the shape of their land. Although, maybe they did, but if they mapped it all out and understood, but they probably didn't see it from the satellite image. But it's one of these things that makes me think like, whoa, is there a divine aspect of this? Like,
I bet they did, man.
Some kind of cosmic divine aspect that their land is in the makeup of the flower. The flower is the single most important central key to their civilization. It's this profoundly deep mystery here that I've never seen anybody talk about.
That's cool.
But so this is if you go back to the paper.
I mean, I've got a vase that has the Eye of the Sahara scratched into it. I mean, so if they was that based off of the Rishat structure? I mean, could very easily be a very similar thing.
Yeah.
If they're mapping out one, they're mapping out the other. I'm sure they knew. I mean, they obviously knew. I'm sure they mapped it out. I guarantee.
Well, yeah, they certainly had maps. I just wonder.
That's
we don't have evidence of the map. Well, we have evidence of some maps, but not like of an entire, their entire country or whatever. But so here we have next is shape of the Nile. So from satellite imagery, the Nile spreads out like the head of the lotus flower, growing out from a long stalk and blooming into the Mediterranean, just like their knowledge did. It bloomed out into the Mediterranean and thus spread to the rest of the world. So I put coincidence ? What is the likelihood that this flower that is unique to Egypt, the flower they depicted most by far on their temple and tomb walls, would also be reflected in the landscape of Egypt from space? Egypt is the single most unique country geographically on the entire planet. Next, we have gift of the Nile. The Greek traveler Herodotus, around 450 BC, famously wrote that the Egyptian civilization is a gift from the Nile. It was a unique and enormous oasis protected by monuments and deserts on both sides, continually fertilized by the black soil carried in from the river itself. So it's seasonally inundated. So So the Nile River was seen by the Egyptians as the center of the world and life itself, while the flower was symbolic of life itself, while the Nile River itself is also in the shape of the lotus flower. It's just a profoundly deep thing, right?
Yeah.
And so it made me, and this all came from the Minoans depicting that flower on that mortar and pestle bowl, and it made me think, so maybe it's the Minoans that tip off to us what exactly this was being used for. It had some kind of psychedelic purpose. It had a profound, psychological effect on the Egyptians. It was a sexual stimulant. The chemical, the apomorphine that's used in that is what's used to treat Parkinson's disease today, and it's also used in Viagra. So it's like this wonder drug for the Egyptians that I think, depending on how you brewed it or how you aged it, and how you consumed it, had different effects on you. And on top of all of that, they start messing around with it because it's rising every day and going back into the water to worship the sun. So it's this core central aspect of ancient Egypt. Have you ever heard an Egyptologist talk about it though before?
Never, no. I mean, the lotus flower for sure, but not nearly in this depth.
Right, yeah. And I have seriously dived deep on trying to find a deeper meaning to this flower, and it's like it's just brushed off. Even when I'm in Egypt, so the Egyptologists that I talk to, they don't really care too much about the purpose of the flower or what the deeper meaning is or why it's on the temple columns. Here's an idea I had. I don't know if the evidence stacks up. It's just hard to find the evidence researching this, especially on my own. One thing I had thought, the first thing that struck me was during the Christian era of Egypt, when people were going to sleep in the temples, they're sleeping in the temples, and they're hoping, these are pagans, not Christians, that are going to sleep in the temples, and the priests that are there would take some kind of offering or whatever, and they'd set out this little sack for the people to sleep on. Now, I should say this is maybe around 300 BC that this is happening. Supposedly it's based on ancient practices, but we don't really know. We don't even know what's going on in Egyptian temples, by the way. Like this is off limits. Normal people couldn't go, your regular Egyptians couldn't really go inside of the temples. Maybe every so often on a sacred parade or something like that, you might be able to go in it once a year or once in your lifetime. But it was closed off just for the priests, and there was an area that was closed off for the pharaoh himself in some temples, like at Luxor Temple, or I think there's an area of Karnak Temple as well. But during the Christian era, these priests that are still holding on to, and maybe even the early Roman era, that are still, as they say, they're holding on to these ancient practices. And they'd bring people into the temple, a certain part of it, and they'd set out these little beds or mats or whatever, and you could lay down inside of the temple underneath the night sky that was painted on the temple wall. And when you slept in the temple, the god would come visit you in your dream and would help a woman conceive a child, or help somebody with their illness or ailments, whatever problem it was. You just hoped that the god of the temple you're going to visit would visit you in your dream and help heal you. Well, supposedly there's scant research to suggest that, of course, all this is scant. We're dealing with the ancient world. That these people may have been consuming things or drinking some kind of wine or like a beer, an ancient beer, and we don't know if those beers were infused in anything to make the dreams more vivid. But if for anybody that's watching, if you ever smoked weed or something and you go dream, or you take melatonin, you'll have intense dreams there. And so there's this idea that there may have been psychedelics, mild psychedelics that the Egyptians had access to, maybe the Blue Lotus, that's being infused in these wines or beers that they're drinking, or maybe they're even smoking something to enhance their dream as they fall asleep. And I wondered if I was laying down in the temple of Komombo. I was laying down in the temple of King Khnum, and he's just this ram-headed god, and he has this beautiful temple, and he's got the night sky on his temple, and even at Dendera, there's this beautiful blue night sky, and you have the goddess Nut going up and down. She's the Milky Way, and you're laying down there, and you can only imagine the torches like sparkling on the night sky, and you're seeing this column that's acting as the stem of the blue lotus, and the blue lotus is blooming into the night sky. And it made me wonder symbolically, maybe it's undetectable, but is that symbolic of the fact that the blue lotus is the gateway into the outer world? Does that make sense? Because it's certainly a very like a Mayanist way to interpret things, but I wonder if that's needed. You know, somebody with a highly symbolic perspective on the ancient world coming into Egypt and seeing something that an Egyptologist who was introduced to the Egyptian world from reading an Egyptology textbook, you grow up within parameters, right? And you can't see outside the parameters. It takes someone else with a different perspective to come in and see that. And that was one of the ideas I had too, is are these columns that are blooming into the night sky from the lotus flower, is it symbolic of the fact that that is the path to get to this night sky outer world? Because the Egyptians viewed all the stars in the night sky as being the places where the gods lived and where their ancestors lived. And so, you know, they didn't know that they were giant balls of gas in space. And so it makes me wonder if that lotus flower, another purpose of it is to consume it, to have vivid dreams that, you know, call upon the essence of these gods or ancestors to come down into your, you know, sleep and heal you, something akin to that. And dreams are so important in Egyptian society. One of the very first stories we have from Egypt is the story of Joseph of the Bible in Egypt, maybe during the Middle Kingdom, sometime between 1600 and 1800 BC. And whether or not he was a real figure, we still have this ancient story of a man who was profoundly gifted at interpreting dreams, and so much so that when he's imprisoned in Egypt, he's brought up to the palace to start interpreting the pharaoh's dreams. Well, then we have stories that come down to us, whether they're true or not, of it's either Djoser or it's Imhotep. It might be Djoser that is having these dreams where either Horus or Ra is disappointed in Djoser's reign, and he wants him to build, you know, some kind of grand monument to bring, to bring favor and honor back to the god, to bring favor on Egypt. So that's 2700 BC, as far as we know, that Djoser and Imhotep have this dream that inspires the first pyramid. You know, so there's just this very important aspect of dreams there, but there's no archaeological evidence for dreams, right? So it's just this interesting, vast, very dense topic that I've been wrapped up in. If you go back to the paper, Ryan, really quickly though, I mean, what are your thoughts?
All right, that's fascinating though. Mine totally blown. I mean, it's like it's really, really cool stuff, and it's like very thought-provoking, open-minded, something that I hadn't heard from anybody before. So really, really cool that you're thinking about that and kind of bringing a new perspective into this that's totally logical and totally makes a lot of sense. And you can kind of see why people probably have avoided, going down this path.
It's very polarizing, controversial, you know. I was telling one of my close friends, I love the guy to death. He's a Roman historian. I was talking to him about it when we were in Egypt, and I could see him like grimacing at this. You know, he just knew it was controversial, and if I go down this route, it's going to be controversial, even though it's nothing that crazy.
It's really not.
No.
I mean, it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned that you think that you have an idea as to why the vases stopped getting made.
Yeah. So the place where the highest quantity of these vases were being made, Ryan, on my paper, I think I have maybe something written about this where it might be Egypt in the vases or Blue Lotus in the vases. Okay, Egypt in the vases. There we go. Okay, yeah, you're already on it. All right, so if you'd scroll into the first section. So let's start off with my idea of why granite and diorite are being used over softer stones like alabaster this early on. So I put down, here, the main thing that I see proposed in most textbooks is this a luxury or prestige item? I've even seen the little lug handles. They'll call them like necklaces, like you have over here on your alien. That's what a lot of people.
Ross.
Yeah. Sorry, Ross.
Sorry.
I didn't mean to.
He's easily offended.
Yeah. But I've seen a lot of people propose that they could have been necklaces or they're luxury prestige items. I loved Ryan's idea that he was equating them to like watches, where Well, a watch doesn't have a greater purpose other than telling time, but it's an art piece, right? It's something to, we don't question why we obsess over watches, right? I liked that. So in later Egyptian society, statues of pharaohs and gods are carved from stones like granite and diorite. Does the type of stone indicate wealth? Does it indicate wealth only because it's a harder stone, or is there another thus far invisible significance to it? Like, does the color matter? Whereas in the Olmec world, the color of stone might matter.
I mean, the alabaster is not very attractive, I guess I would say. Like they did use breccia at times, in like the pre-dynastic time period. And so the breccia can be like, it's softer, of course, like alabaster, like a marble, but it's beautiful. I mean, there's, show some examples, but Ryan can show them on the screen. But they did use limestone calcite, which is breccia, and that stuff is beautiful. So I wonder, like, I mean, part of it potentially just that it's just just a more beautiful type of stone, I guess.
I think so. From what I can gather, is that the Egyptians don't put a preference on a type of stone just because it's hard. From what I can tell. Although there's, of course, contradictory evidence to that. But, at least in later dynasties, like we were talking about earlier, there are sarcophagi that are made out of gray whack. And the properties of that gray whack is it sparkles like a diamond does. And I can imagine in an environment like down in a tomb where the only light being cast on it is from a torch. The torch is flickering. It's flickering over like this sparkling, glowing orange sarcophagus. Maybe the properties of it, like you're saying with breccia, they may like that and not really put much of a difference to it, other than they know if they work with breccia, it's going to be easier than working with diorite. But then does that make, if you have something like that made out of diorite, is it a symbol as though you could afford to have that made? So there's that. Then I put, is there a divinity to the vases or the type of stone? Is it supposed to be more difficult to work because in making the vase, you are bringing honor to the gods or performing some kind of holy thing? Does it have a divinity? Does it need to be perfect because it is holy, or does it need to be perfect because it has a function? Those are some of the things that I juggle with. Like we were talking earlier, we're dealing with, at least what I see as a pious society that has not reached this Western Socratic conclusion that comes to us in 5th century Athens, where people start realizing that the gods don't really have much to do with our lives. This further back in history, even further away, this is very far away. Even if at the youngest date, we're talking about 2,000 years before Athens, so we're deep into pious civilization at this point, people caring about honoring the gods. And I put harder stones like granite and diorite. This is actually sort of my thought here. Rather than there being a divinity to the purpose of the vases, or why the vases are perfect, or the stone, I say harder stones like granite and diorite are less porous than materials like alabaster, which would make them preferred for storing valuable / expensive liquids like imported Minoan wine and other oils. You can more effectively age and store wine in harder, less porous stone vases, which prevent the liquid from absorbing into the stone, and the stone is less likely to fall away and chip away into the liquid. And so I wonder, do wealthier people prefer, because they're storing something valuable like wine imported from Bronze Age, early Greece, it's so valuable and so expensive, they're going to infuse it with the lotus flower. It has this powerful, psychedelic, holy aspect to it. You don't want it diluted. You don't want it absorbing into the stone. You want to age it so that it's more powerful. It's more, has a more profound effect. So, and you can afford to have it made in a nicer vessel, so you do that. But why is the vessel perfect? Well, I don't know. That's the reason I say is like, what if it's a holy thing as well? It needs to be perfect because you're putting some kind of perfect, expensive, imported compound from the other side of the Mediterranean. So then I say, why did the creation of hard stone vases end around 3100 BC, the beginning of Dynasty 1? I should really say around Dynasty 0. Dynasty 1 to Dynasty 0, there's a controversy there over what exactly it is, but Dynasty 0 is the reign of the king Menes, but we don't know if Menes is the same king as Narmer. We don't know if he's the same person, like if he gives himself the pharaonic name, or if Menes is Narmer's father. So we have Dynasty 0. But at Dynasty 0, the vases are not being made anymore, according to the archaeological record that we have.
So David, what's his name?
Miano.
Yeah, he would disagree. Right?
Oh, does he really?
Yeah. He says that they were made all the way through until, through that the production level decreased, and his date, I think, is 2650 BC, that the production level decreased, but that they continued to make hard stone vases all the way through until late dynasties. But
really?
He doesn't really know what he's talking about. But I mean, that's what his. I think I just bring it up to say that there's some disagreement about the dates amongst different people.
I've never seen a stone vase, because I've gone to the museums that I know he's been to in Alexandria, where you're looking at the Ptolemaic dynasties, the end of Greek civilization, and I've looked for hard stone vases. There's hard stone statues being made. There's a granite bust of Alexander's head. So this is a whole other thing we'll talk about one day, is Alexandria. Oh my gosh, that's such a cool topic, because I think the Greeks learned how to do a lot of things that were happening in the Old Kingdom, but a lot of things come back during that time period. But hard stone vase making does not come back during that period, and it doesn't exist, as far as I'm aware, during the Persian era, during the invasion of the Assyrians to like the 21st dynasty, towards the end of Egyptian civilization, the end of the New Kingdom, these hard stone vases aren't around anymore. From what I know, and the archaeological data I've looked at, is that it's agreed upon by a lot of Egyptologists that from Dynasty 1 or Dynasty 0, the vases are not being made anymore. They completely end. Now from there, it doesn't mean they disappear, because we have Djoser, who Egyptologists say he gathered thousands of these vases, anywhere from, I think the number is controversial, but it's anywhere from 10 to 40,000 vases of these hard stone vases that he stored underneath his pyramid. And they sit, and the traditional thought is that these were heirlooms from his ancestors, right? You've heard this before too. Now, Djoser's ancestors, here, I'll just read it off here, because it's more concise the way I wrote it. So the overwhelming majority of pre-dynastic hard stone vases were discovered beneath Djoser's step pyramid complex. The overwhelming majority. I mean, there's scant evidence of them found in other places, but the vast majority of them are found here. And then I should also say, we find them in burials. It ends at 3100 BC, 3000, 29, 28, 27 is his. But everywhere in there, we're still finding them scarcely buried in other people's tombs. People love these heirlooms, and they want themselves buried with it to maybe take it with them into the next world. That continues all the way to 2100 BC. After 2100 BC, there's nobody who's dying in 2000 BC that's burying themselves with these vases, because they're not accessible anymore. For one reason or another, they're not, and they never appear in tombs again after that they've marked. So the overwhelming majority of pre-dynastic hard stone vases were discovered beneath Djoser's step pyramid complex and are believed to have belonged to Djoser's ancestors, who were likely from northern Egypt. Archaeological and literary evidence, such as Manetho's History of Egypt from the 3rd century BC and the Narmer Palette from 3100 BC, tell us that dynastic Egypt began when a king from the south, Narmer or Menes, we don't know if those are the same people or not, marched north and conquered northern Egypt, smiting their king. This is where the smiting pose, where the pharaoh is grabbing his opposing ruler by the hair and crushing his head in with the mace. Smiting their king and declaring himself the first king of the two lands. This conquering of northern Egypt's kingdom likely disrupted and halted many different aspects of their society. And I assume the industry involved in creating these vases, along with the technology used to make them, was lost, hidden, destroyed, or buried during the chaos, answering the questions of why we do not find them being crafted in the archaeological record beyond 3100 BC or Dynasty 0, because they're all in the north. Almost all of these vases are up in the north. We don't really find them down south at Aswan. We're not really finding them down south at Luxor. They're all up in the north in the Memphite region in all of the burials around there. And then Jojer, who was born in Memphis in the north, takes all of his ancestors' vases and buries himself with them. And I just wonder if he is hearkening back. Clearly he is, because he's saying these are the heirlooms of my ancestors. So he had to know who his direct ancestors were, and that they were pre-dynastic Egyptians living in the north who made these vases and are responsible for them. But they're not made anymore. And it made me wonder, and I had that realization. I was like, oh, that's right. If you look at the archaeological record, there's a different type of vase making that's being made in the south. Have you ever seen the pottery that is a similar shape to these vases, but they're red and black? It's called like Badarian culture. So those vases are being made in the south, and you have Nakata culture as well that's making different kinds of vessels, but these hardstone vases are from the north. And I think that looking through Jojer, you can see, oh, okay, this is something that was wiped out. When the first pharaoh, the guy who united both lands, came in, I think that unification, the chaos, the war breaking out, the leveling of northern Egyptian government to be subservient to the now pharaoh of the two lands, I just wonder if that's one of the industries that completely ended. Was it too expensive? In the chaos of it, was the place where these things are made, was it destroyed? Something is there, and I think a smoking gun is the fact that Jojer and his immediate ancestors are Memphites from northern Egypt, because not every pharaoh is in this straight lineage. Like a pharaoh will die, or he'll be usurped or assassinated, or he'll be overthrown or whatever. So it's kind of messy, but Jojer and his ancestors are Memphites from northern Egypt, and we interpret those as being his ancestors. So I just wonder if that's my explanation or my possible theory as to why they're not made anymore.
Okay, fascinating.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be that the lathe was destroyed or something.
Could be
too. They weren't able to rebuild it. And,
yeah. And I don't really have a strong understanding of the technicalities behind making it, and that's how I preface my whole thing. Is it's not about my explanation is not about how they were made. That's not what I do. I study culture, I study the people, and I try to put the pieces together of how people are interacting with these vases, and can we find a history to go along with the vases, right? Can we give them some kind of context? And so that's what I look for. And so in that, I think, I'm just proposing an idea as to why they were stopped being made, what happened to the technology, that it falls out during the chaos of this unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. And then as far as the use of them, my thought is that wealthy people who are getting a hold of and have the access to use the lotus flower in imported wine, foreign wine. I mean, they have their own wines too, but inexpensive wines and brews and beers, and they're aging the lotus, and they want it to stay preserved in something high quality, right? Something that's not, that the liquid isn't going to absorb into, and it's not going to flake off into the liquid. It doesn't explain why the vases are perfect, and I should say, just to be honest, a good counter to my own argument is these could be later uses of vases that have been laying around, right? So it's hard to say. That's a good counter to my whole argument too. But yeah, that's my premise and my approach, kind of what I'm working on right now with these vases.
Nice. Yeah. Super interesting. It's really, really cool thought and possibility. The certificates of authenticity, a lot of them state that they are from between 2650 and 3000 BC or 3100 BC, even on the hardstone ones, but it doesn't mean that they know, I mean, exactly, it could just be estimated, just guesses,
Exactly. Well, and I wonder with a lot of the certificates, is it I think either way is fine, but sometimes on the certificates, they're either saying this was found in a tomb from 2600 BC, or they're estimating when the artifact was made, right? So that's kind of the hard part is okay, you can't judge how old the vase is because the vases are made in the north, but when they're found in tombs in the south, that tomb in the south is usually hundreds of years later, right? So you can't use it to say, okay, this was made in 2600 BC in the south, when really it was made 500 years earlier in the north. So yeah. And it can go back way further than that. I mean, I'm saying 3100 BC. That's when they're stopped being made. These things are made hundreds of years before that. So
yeah, it's cool. Yeah. And potentially thousands of years before that, I guess.
Could be.
Right? I mean,
Well,
possibly.
There are those photos, I should say, in Aswan, which is in the south, of supposedly a 10,000-year-old grave that has what looks like, you and I have talked about this, it has what looks like a hard stone vase in there. But I don't know that exact specimen, if we know where that was. It just looks like it in the photo. And that's, what is it? Is it an 8,000 BC grave? It's something crazy.
No, I think it's more than that. I think it's like 12,000 BC. I think it's
really,
like 14,000 years old.
Yeah.
It's Ben talks about it. It's it's in a couple of his videos.
So I would love to find that specimen of what's in that photo.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but that whole site now is underwater, right? My understanding is my understanding is because they built the dam, and now that whole grave site area.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But that's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else on vases?
I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot. That's why I needed to bring in the paper with me.
Yeah, for sure. What about these structures beneath the pyramids that people are talking about now?
Well, so in the chaos of my wife graduating from med school and us buying a new house and everything, I have only had phone calls about it and not really dived into it myself. But from what I can understand, is this is another finding that's being projected from a very credulous Italian archaeologist, who supposedly found something in the Great Pyramid 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and it was basically immediately proven to be false or lacked any credibility. And so now a couple years later, he's back with a new finding that he's used a satellite. He's used a satellite image to scan underneath Khafra's pyramid, which is the center pyramid, and he says that he's found these 8 cylindrical structures with these 5 duplicate structures inside Khafra's pyramid. I think the very first thing that made my my BS radar go off. Now, I don't want to say, I don't think there's anything wrong with people being excited about stuff like this. And do I think there's probably something under Khafra's pyramid? Yes, I do. We can get into that in a second.
There's for sure tunnels and all kinds of...
Yeah, absolutely there are.
Yeah.
But the problem with this whole scan is that, well, the immediate smoking gun that this is credulous at best is that the scan did not pick up the structures that are already in the pyramid. It couldn't see the structures that we know are in there, or the voids that we know are in the pyramid. It picked up different voids. And then I think the problem is they made this graphic and they took the 3D model of the king's chamber with the relieving chambers on top of that, and they duplicated it 5 times in their little graphic. There was another image that you had up that showed it. And it, anybody who's well versed in Egypt, it looks at this and knows, I don't know if a serious researcher would make a graphic that looks like this. And I should just say that those gigantic columns are yeah. I mean, I don't know. It seems highly unlikely to me that this is going to be proven to have a lot of validity to it. Maybe mostly based on the fact that it didn't pick up the voids that we know are in the pyramid. What are your thoughts on it?
I haven't researched it enough to have a conclusion on it, and that probably tells you something about how likely I think that it is, that this is anything at all other than a misinterpretation of data or a mistake somewhere. But I know, but I do know that people are going to look into this and are going to find out whether or not this is true. So I'm open to it being a possibility but I mean, 2 kilometers down, that's some serious work when you're talking about going that far underground with a structure. It would be absolutely
2 Eiffel Towers deep.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard up to 2 kilometers deep, which is more than an Eiffel Tower. I think it's unlikely. Ryan, can you pull up? I just sent you an email from Chris Dunn, and maybe we can just look at that real quick. That might be fun. You want to read this? You're a good reader.
Oh gosh, I may have to zoom in. I am not a good seer. I think that's the problem. All right. So having proposed in my book, the Giza power plant and Giza, the Tesla connection, that important features related to power generation might lie beneath the Giza pyramids in Egypt, I have been asked to comment on the recent announcement of the discovery of massive previously undiscovered voids and constructions beneath those pyramids. My initial impressions, based on my own research and that of others referenced here, are that if the reported scan data and analyses are correct, this would be a major discovery and a validation of my own theories, but more importantly, provide motivation to pursue a path towards clean energy and a safer environment. The reason for that, I believe, does not come from me, but from a remarkable German physicist named Friedman Freund. I'm not familiar with him.
Yeah.
Freund.
He's talked about him before.
All right. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, why not? Let's go.
All right. So Robert Votter, Chris Dunn, and Dr. Freund at the SETI Institute, NASA physicist Dr. Friedman, while researching the physics behind earthquake lights, with the hopes of developing an earthquake early warning system, discovered that when igneous rock in the lithosphere is put under stress, proxy defects in the mineral cause positive Hole electrons to shoot to the surface. He was able to demonstrate during lab experiments that electrons will flow when igneous rock is put under pressure, describing it as semiconductor physics. Dr. Freund gives an excellent explanation of his discovery during a TED Talk in Christchurch, New Zealand, in his highly recommended YouTube video. All right. This looks like this is going to be incredibly long. Is it not? Okay.
I'll take it.
I'm just going off the cursor right here.
I know there's a lot of stuff at the end that's not necessary. I should say at the outset of Freund's research was not even remotely inspired by the pyramids. Neither has he given any indication in his writing or in private conversations that he had even considered that he may have possibly discovered the answer to solving future environment and energy production problems. I made that connection and saw his research as significant in resolving the questions and doubts about whether piezoelectricity output from stressing granite in the Great Pyramid's king chamber could be a factor in producing a significant amount of energy. Considering the level of science knowledge and experience of those involved in the Scan Pyramid project, I'm not qualified to judge any of their findings. Similarly, I'm not qualified to judge the findings of the SAR scanning team. However, I would love to know how the geometrically accurate CAD drawings were extended out of the raw data, because they seem to represent a massive Tesla-like electromagnetic earthquake machine. But even without the CAD, I believe there is enough in the scans to warrant further investigation. I would like to attach a caveat to my enthusiasm for the work of the SAR research team's work and imagination it has sparked. That is, we must keep in mind that considering what I wrote in my book, my confirmation bias may be working overtime, and there should always be a healthy amount of skepticism when anything that seems to firmly embody in the realm of science fiction is attached to ancient monuments. We're living in exciting times. If this turns out to be fictional, it's a more compelling and interesting fiction than the pyramids as tomb theory we have been taught. If it is proven to be fact, we could be on the threshold of a bright and harmonious future. In 1902, Charles Holland Duell, who served as United States Commissioner of Patents, blah, 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 said, in my opinion, all previous advances in the various lines of invention will appear totally insignificant when compared to those which the present century will witness. Okay, so he's excited and he's optimistic that we're going to find something from this, and he thinks that it supports his theory of a power plant, and he's, cautiously optimistic, I guess, but feels as if that this could be supporting evidence to what he has proposed, and it's not in any way in conflict. So I thought that it was cool that he kind of released a statement that went out and discussed it. Yeah, well, so like you and I were saying, I'm extremely skeptical of these guys, but I think it's pretty commendably transparent that Chris says, like, my own confirmation bias may be at work here, because obviously he is personally
like maybe like emotionally invested in something like this, and this is personally exciting and vindicating to him. But I think it's good that he put out a statement. I know his audience is waiting for him to put out a statement, and I think at the end to say, hey, this is something I am also personally excited about. So maybe my confirmation bias as I work here. I think that's commendable on his part.
Yeah.
But as far as
he's super logical, smart. I mean, he's not.
I feel much more confident about the Scan Pyramids project than I do about these guys, because these guys have Scan Pyramids. Those guys, they take their time and they do really good work. And the discovery of the void in the pyramid, that's
big deal.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It might be the biggest. When they go in there, it'll be one of the biggest moments in archaeology. It'll be one of the biggest moments ever in archaeology, But I'm more skeptical of these guys, and so we'll just wait to see. Unfortunately, I'm so busy right now. I don't have the time to like dive into this, but I'm looking forward to seeing what it turns into. And like I was saying, you and I both know there are people in Egypt that are gonna go figure out what's going on and publish something about it.
Yeah, and then cover it up and write up a bullshit story.
There's that.
Yeah.
There's that.
Just kidding. If it was something, and if we left it up to those guys, we would never know the truth about anything at all, I feel.
Yeah. Now I was talking to Johanna the other day, and we were talking, and when I was in Egypt, I was noticing, when you go to the Giza Plateau, it's like a pin cushion with these labyrinths and shafts that are all over the plateau, just falling off into the earth, and they're so interconnected under the ground. Like you've got the Osiris shafts and everything. And I was talking to Egyptologists while I was in Egypt, and I was saying, what's the likelihood that the pyramid could have covered up older shafts and tunnels that used to have entrances up here on the top of the plateau, that they just covered it up and now it's sealed off and you can't get into it, but maybe there's still something in there. And then everyone I asked was like, no, that didn't happen. I'm like, well, why? And he's like, well, Khufu wouldn't have done that. These guys wouldn't have done that. I'm like, what do you mean?
Did you know the guy?
Yeah.
Do we know anything about him?
Well, and here's the really odd thing is I had an Egyptologist tell me that that Khufu wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
He goes, Khufu wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have, covered up a different tomb. That's not something that they did. And I'm like, really? Because
that's creepy to say that. Like it's creepy to say Khufu wouldn't have done that. Like the guy lived like 5,000 years ago.
Yeah. And there's no, it's not like we can know him in the way that you can know Plato or Socrates.
Nobody knows anything
or
about him.
So, then I was thinking, there's a village that used to exist over there that Menkaura just turned over and removed everybody from their homes to build his valley temple.
Yeah.
So, there's more evidence to say that they were disrupting things going on than and building on top of things. And it's such an Egyptian thing to tear down a temple and build something new out of it. I don't know why you would say that.
Yeah.
That's the way it is all over the world.
The tunnels, there's evidence of tunnels all over the world, and we don't know how old they are, but a lot of them date back to before, well, I guess if you're listening to traditional archaeology, they'll tell you that they date back to the exact same time that the pyramids were built, because that's when everything was built. But if you look at it with an open mind, with the possibility that, hey, maybe people were digging underground during the time of the Younger Dryas because they had to get off of the surface of the planet and they needed to live underground. Then if the tunnels underneath on the Giza Plateau are actually 12,000 years old, ish 11,600 years old, then we do think that the pyramids were built after that, then very well could be on top of really, really, really old tunnels. There's no reason that would be a crazy idea.
Yeah, well, and I think that, and that's sort of, I was kind of like poking at him for like anything more, just something more than what's traditionally known. And I mean, even the most boring conservative idea of that could be, there are shafts in there that hold tombs or whatever that are older than the pyramid that are now sealed off, but is there stuff still in there that's completely cut off? And they were completely opposed to this idea. And so that's when I was talking to Johanna the other day, and I was saying, well, I don't have any doubt that they're really, that those scans maybe did pick up some kind of void underneath Khafre's pyramid. But when they make it out to be like it's a machine or something, I don't know. I mean, at the very least, I would say that there's shafts and tunnels under there that lead to something ancient. But as far as I can't give any credence or credibility to what people think they might be, because nobody really knows. So yeah.
What else is interesting happening out there right now? We covered, I think, a lot of South America. We covered a lot of Egypt. We covered Greece, which is going to be your new thing, which is pretty cool. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned last night at dinner that Amon Hillman was potentially some of your inspiration.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'd love to talk about this. So as we were talking a little bit earlier, the origins of Western civilization just had been eating away at me for a long time. I never really talk about modern day history. Just because I try to keep my channel and what I do as an escape from real life. The ancient world, as dangerous as it was, is this safe, nice place that we can go to now, and just get immersed in it. And that's kind of what I try to do. But I'm as like red-blooded American patriotic as anybody gets. And I love United States history. I love like what the United States represents, that we are, ideologically speaking, supposed to be the heroic civilization that grabbed its own destiny and is trying to execute this American experiment as best as possible, right? We're such a unique people, and I love that about us. You look at just the boys that went off in World War II. Think about those guys that got drafted. That is the United States of America, And I love the United States, and we are so deeply tied to the Greeks in so many ways. I can see ourselves in them when I study them. Not to get like overly into the nuances of it, but think about the Battle of Thermopylae with the Spartans, the movie 300, right? There's a lot of nuance here, but it's the first time when Darius and then his son Xerxes are trying to invade, and as the movie 300 goes, it says Darius is annoyed by the idea of Greek freedom. There are these Greeks who are starting to realize that they're getting away from kings. Think about this. The whole ancient world was ruled by strong men, like if you study ancient Egypt, the idea is that it started off with chieftains, and then you have these villages that are ruled by a strong man who asserts his dominance, and then he establishes his own little government, and eventually it grew up into regional rulers, and then one day it culminates into a pharaoh, right? Well, that's the same way in the rest of the ancient world. All of the Americas, as far as we know, were ruled by kings or emperors. But there's this, on the Aegean in Greece, these men had this realization that they could build a civilization that wasn't ruled by a king. It kind of evolves. You have maybe during the Bronze Age you have an emperor like Agamemnon in a certain way ruling over all of Greece, but then it goes down into kings during the Dark Ages. In the Archaic period, you have kings, and then as the Archaic period is emerging into the Classical period, Athens moves to this era of tyrants, and it's all based around Athens, Greece. They have this era of tyrants, and then a tyrant it doesn't have the negative connotation back then that we give it today. People quite liked tyrants, like Pisistratus. He was a pretty good guy. He built a lot of, he made a lot of public architecture for Athens, and they look upon his rule with, like rose-colored glasses. They liked him. But eventually they move away from that and they move into a democratic society. They have the Athenian democracy, which is basically mob rule, and it had a lot of problems. But it was very special. It was the first time that people had this idea that we don't have to be ruled. We can rule ourselves, and we don't need a king. Where did this come from? In a world that was only ruled over by kings, how do you have the epiphany to break the chains of, like, you're like defying the laws of reality at that point, right? And I think a really poignant thing here is the two longest lasting democracies in all of human history. The United States were roughly 250 years. At number one, we're the longest lasting, and people don't realize how special we are because the second longest lasting is Athens at 189 years or 186 years. That's it. What we live in is such a special little piece of paradise that human beings are able to grab onto and hold for just a little bit of time. You know, the Roman Empire, if you include the late Roman Republic, which is really kind of an empire without a name, lasted, well, we don't really know exactly when Rome fell, and it's kind of, you know, controversial, but hundreds and hundreds of years, you know, vastly longer than Athenian democracy and vastly longer than the United States. But I think that something I connect deeply with is this battle at Thermopylae when 300 Spartans, you know, they couldn't send the whole Spartan army. The Spartans have to answer to the Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi gives this really ominous message back to the Spartans that's saying all of Sparta will fall unless a king of Sparta dies. And basically all of the other religious leaders of Sparta are totally against this war against the Persians. Most of the Greek world is like, I don't really want to go to war against the Persians. They're open to just letting the Persians come in and wreck everything and reassert their dominance over Greece. And the main players are Athens and Sparta that want to fight against Persia. Now the Athenians had already won the Battle of Marathon, but the Battle of Thermopylae is more famous because it's like the Alamo. It's the first time in history that we have a recording of the loser being the moral victor of the war or of a battle. So you have these 300 Spartans that are accompanied by other Greeks, but we just look at the Spartans. And it's this vastly outnumbered army, but you have these 300 Spartans that go up to the Thermopylae Pass, and they go against the wishes of the religious leaders of ancient Greece, and they're led by Leonidas, and he knows how important this is to go meet the Persians up here, and he funnels them into Thermopylae Pass, where the Persian army, I think it was Herodotus that said that the army was so big that it drank the rivers dry. It was a massive army, and they think anywhere from 130,000 to 300,000 Persians are marching along the northern coast of the Aegean to come down and storm Greece. And so Leonidas and his 300 Spartans, accompanied by, I think, 5,000 other Greeks, but not all of those 5,000 Greeks stay. A lot of them flee when they see the size of the Persian army. And they position themselves at Thermopylae Pass, and essentially what they're doing is these 300 Spartans, to preserve Greek identity, to preserve Greek freedom. Now, this doesn't mean that Spartans weren't ruled by a king, that Sparta itself wasn't ruled by a king, but the idea of Greek society, and they don't realize it yet, but what Western society is either going to be crushed, or 300 Spartans are going to stand there and give the rest of Greece time to prepare for the Persian invasion, and give Athens time to prepare. And Greece and Athens are bitter rivals, and becoming more and more rivals, and they'll have an entire war against themselves later on. But those 300 Spartans give this selfless, brave sacrifice. Not one of those men thought that they were going to make it out of there alive. And they drew the line in the sand on that day in the early 5th century BC between West and East. And that's where Western society was born. On that day, they drew the line in the sand and they said, we are Greeks, we are free. And those 300 Spartans, that Battle of Thermopylae, at the end of the day, every Spartan had died, and roughly about 20,000 Persians had been killed out of the maybe 100,000 to 300,000 person army, which was insane losses. Like it completely demoralized the Persians as far as we know from Greek sources. But it invigorated all of Greece, and they realized that their more disciplined, unified, trained armies that actually had formations could actually inflict damage upon this massive slave army that the Persians had. And that the idea of Greek freedom was worth fighting for. And I think it was the first time that the Greeks realized that their identity as a people could be completely eviscerated. And so they all of a sudden, they become invigorated in who they are, and they become very patriotic. And then, so the Persian Wars continue. The Greeks win the Persian Wars at slim odds. And then all of a sudden, classical society, because of that, explodes. The Parthenon, the Acropolis of Greece, is rebuilt. And then you have this, glorious golden era of ancient Greece that forms from this. And you have this explosion of okay, so let's say Athens is a result of this incredible amount of wealth from all the different Greek city-states giving money to Athens to help Athens build their fleet, to help Athens build their army. Sparta also benefits from this, but Athens has a much more liberal approach to society. They don't have kings, but Sparta does. But again, Sparta is also not like Persia, so there's some nuances there, but we focus more on Athens. So think about this. What's at the center of Egyptian civilization? The pyramids. If you go based on, traditional Egyptian thought, and let's just go on not even the actual necessarily the purpose of the pyramids, but let's go to like the central focused, the juiciest time of Egyptian society, which is during the New Kingdom, like the biblical time. Those Egyptians would have been living in the shadow of the pyramids, who they thought were built in tribute of great kings, right? Their whole society reinforces the idea of God kings, right? You're living under the rule of a living God. And the center of your society is either the temple built to the god and the pharaoh in the middle of the city, or the pyramids that sit across the Nile ominously from you. That's the center of Egyptian society. It's all about the god king. Go to Roman society. The center of the city is the Colosseum. You would be able to go to the Colosseum only on days when the Colosseum was open, and you had to pay to go, right? So you're paying money back to the Palisade, or you're paying money back to the emperor just to be able to go have the biggest show in town, right? Or the Roman Forum, but that's a little bit more complicated. The center of Athenian society is the Agora, which is the marketplace. And in that marketplace, you had these buildings. You had the main building that was this long stoa, and a stoa is a covered long colonnade building, and there were several of them built throughout Athens, but they were built for the sole purpose of the Athenians using them however they wanted to. And all that it ended up being was a building that, while you were running out into town to go to the market, which we think people went to the market every single day, you'd buy fresh produce and take it home for that night for dinner, and you have to go back to the market the next day. But this is where people met and mingled. But that stoa is where people just gathered around and just talked. They just talked, and they hung out. And there was a group of philosophers, I think under Zeno, that would meet there so often that when they would come by, everybody would be like, oh, okay, let's get out of the way. All the Stoics are here, because they were the people that met at the Stoa. So these group of philosophers that meet at the Stoa, that's where we get the name the Stoics. And I just think that is such a perfect example of who the Athenians are as a people. Their central piece of public architecture is not a pyramid, that which they think glorifies, some god king. It's not a Colosseum, which glorifies giving money to the government to watch violence take place, which would have been fun. It's just an open colonnade building for people to meet and talk to one another. There's the Stoa. So, all the philosophers would hang out here. People would gather and talk, and all the questions that humanity would ask later on. They say that there's a famous. Here we go. That's what it would have. So this is the recreated Stoa that's at the Agora right now in Athens. And so, Aristotle would have hung out here. Socrates would have hung out here. Plato would have hung out here. All their students would have hung out here at the Stoa. And as the saying goes, is that all of the study of philosophy in later history is just footnotes or derivative of Plato's writings, that he covered everything. Every question that's ever been asked was asked by the ancient Greeks. And I just think about that fight for independence and freedom, and for a civilization that's able to rule over itself, to then turn around and create a marketplace that's just for the people to meet, and it's central. It's the central part of its public architecture is not a pyramid. It's not a Colosseum. It's an open colonnade for people to gather and talk to each other. That is the society that, as one of my favorite historians, Jeremy McInnery, he says that Athenian society. I have it written somewhere. I mean, they give us mathematics, history, philosophy. I can go on and on and on and on and on about all of the things that were invented in Greece after they basically pushed off the Persians, after the Persian Wars, in the height of classical Greece. Everything that laid the foundation for all of Western society occurred in 150 years, and over the course of 150 years in Athens, Greece. It was one of these few moments in time where people reached an endless capacity and were able to do things at the highest level. They were so smart. And another thing that makes them unique is that they're so free. They have this, the closest thing that the Greeks had to what the Romans have in the Colosseum was the Greek theater. And people would go to the theater once a year, and for 3 days, you'd watch from sun up to sundown. You'd watch these plays after plays after plays. And they were written and practiced all year long. And the plays were relevant, whether they were comedic or tragic, they were relevant to what was going on in Athenian society at that time. And it was also highly critical of Athenian society as well. So they were like, of all the things that they gave us, this sense of freedom, this sense of fighting for freedom, this sense of bravery, philosophy, asking questions, mathematics, invention, or whatever, the most important thing that they gave us is what was on display in the theater, and it's self-awareness. A civilization to be able to look at itself and be critical of itself, because it won't step on the ego of a ruler, right? When there's no ruler, you can be critical of yourself. And so the Greek plays would call out politicians in the middle of the play. They would make a joke out of somebody and talk directly to this politician. Or there would be in the play the Lysistrata. The women of Greece from all around Greece come to Athens, and they gather and they meet and they figure out, well, how are we going to stop the war between Athens and Persia? And they all agree. All the women. Well, Lysistrata, she proposes. She goes. Well, what I say we do is I say we just stop having sex with our husbands. And then the other women go, okay, I'm out of here. I'm not doing this now. And so it's this whole play where it's like the women decide that they're going to restrain from having sex with their husbands. And throughout the play, though, even though it's a comedy, there's these tragic elements and these self-aware elements where they kind of lament the fact that Athens and Sparta aren't close anymore. And this would have hit hard with the people watching this, because the people watching this are literally the Athenian soldiers who have killed Spartans yesterday. Literally yesterday, they killed Spartans, and tomorrow, at the end of, or in 3 days at the end of this, they're going to suit back up and go back out into the Peloponnese or wherever to fight the Spartans. These are people who would sit and watch plays and gather and listen to people being critical of the own war that they're in. And it's just this amazingly intense, self-aware society that you don't see anywhere else in the ancient world. And it's so personal, and I can see us in them. And the founding fathers did too. That's why Washington, D.C. is made of Greek architecture. The founding fathers so many of them could speak Greek or Latin, and it's kind of this jumped over chapter, or it's this, I don't know, it's just overlooked. Like the connections between Americans and the Greeks is so far overlooked, but we're so similar to them. Studying them helps us understand ourselves. And that felt like something that when I was deciding on whether or not I was going to go back to school, I had been on the fence about it. I didn't know if I wanted to go get it. I don't know. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I felt like I wanted to go the next step with doing something. And I think I wanted to connect with something that is deeply interesting, not only because it's an ancient topic, but deeply relevant and something I could really learn from. And that was why, rather than doing something in the Americas or doing something in Egypt, which feel like these alien cultures, I wanted to jump down the hole of something that can help me better understand myself and the world that I live in, as well as another ancient world that connects me to another ancient world like Egypt, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I applied to this continuing education certificate program at the University of Athens in Greece, and spoke with a couple of the administrators there, and they accepted me, and so I begin in September.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So
it's going to be great.
Yeah,
I can't wait to have you back and to see how this education will allow you to share the knowledge that you learned there to the back here. What so in terms of self-awareness of the Greeks versus Americans today, you mentioned some of the similarities. I mean, were they religious? Were the Greeks religious?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In what way? What did religion look like for them?
Well, they were so religious to the point that so you had this great leader. His name was Pericles. He's the first citizen of Athens. So he's like this high-ranking general. He's not a tyrant. He's not a king, but he's also not a normal politician. He's like this dude that was a great general, a great leader. He becomes the first citizen, basically. That's his title. He is the leader that everyone follows, and he was a great man. And every historian basically agrees that this was a great man. His nephew Alcibiades, later on towards maybe the middle part of the second Peloponnesian War, he is a well-liked figure. His Pericles' nephew as well, very charismatic, an incredibly good orator. Basically gets everything he wants, and everyone's in love with him, whether it's men or women. And he's about to be sent off on this Sicilian expedition. And right before he goes, there are these statues of Hermes that are violated. And the Athenian court, apparently there were witnesses that saw that it was Alcibiades, and he's young at this point. That apparently there were witnesses, and he's probably being framed. This is the reality, that Alcibiades and his young buddies went and vandalized these Hermes statues before he was going to be sent off on this expedition. He's a very high-ranking Athenian, and while he's off on that expedition, they send word to put him on a boat and send him all the way back to Athens, where he's going to be put on trial, potentially for execution for violating these statues. So while you have a part of Athenian society, now that's 414 BC. In 399 BC, Socrates is going to be executed for impiety and corrupting the youth, for saying things like, if the gods really are here, they're they're distant and far away, right? So you have these two different sects of society, and probably you have these niche. You probably really what it is it's a small niche of society, the Socratics and the other philosophers that question whether or not the gods really even exist. But all the rest of Athenian society is extremely religious, extremely pious, but yet have this sense of freedom, right? It's an interesting, it's a weird place that we're in, but it's so unique and like precious. But I actually think that we do have a sense of self-awareness in a similar way that the Athenians did. I think their civilization was just as tumultuous and complicated as ours is, and yet ours and theirs was so much better than the alternatives. And I think that that's testament to how flawed humans are. Like Athenian society is extremely dangerous, but it wasn't as dangerous as a lot of other places in the world. The politics, people wanting to become political, that was a battle of life and death. Like if you wanted to become a high-ranking politician, if you were successful, there was a chance that somebody was going to try to frame you for a crime to have you executed. These are people that live like a block away from you, So, but for the people, maybe the lower-ranking, higher-class society, so you have Athenians, but then you have servants, and you have this servant class that has no rights at all. But maybe they still have a better life than servants in other places in the world. So it's this complicated thing, but it's just the origins of this Western mindset. Now, I say that I think that we're self-aware in the way that they are because of how much Americans bicker with each other and how, it is kind of split down the middle. Maybe that comes from the two-party system, but which the Athenians didn't have the dilemma of. That's another thing. They had a literal democracy. So mob rule, like you could be swayed left and right. And that was the problem with Athenian society. And
yeah, that's a big difference. That's a huge difference. Yeah.
So, we have Republican measurements in place to stop that from happening. The pendulum doesn't swing as much in the United States, but you can't blame the Athenians because they literally just invented that form of government, right? But it was better than being ruled over by a bad king, or something.
It's better than what America has today. Even I think you could argue.
Yeah, and some people think so. Yeah. Some people think that like a direct democracy, would be better, or that So there's that. There's dangers to direct democracy too. So that's kind of something that the founding fathers were worried about, was that they liked the mentality of the Athenians under like Periclean Athenian society. They liked that. That's a whole deeply nuanced conversation. But I think that we have a similar outlook on the world that the Athenians do, or especially our own civilization. We're as self-aware as they were because we have the freedom to bicker with each other so much. Like, we constantly self-analyze ourselves, or at least I feel like I do, or maybe we analyze each other a lot.
That's what it is.
We analyze each other.
It's more about judgment. It's more about judging other people than it is being self-aware.
Yeah. And
which is the opposite of self-awareness.
Sure. But people who are ruled over by a complete monarchy don't have the freedom to do any of that at all, right?
To judge other people.
Yeah, they can't judge other people. There's nothing to judge. And if you judge, the only person to judge is not your fellow citizen, because you're all subservient to the God King, and you're not going to cast your judgment on the God King. So in a way, what I mean is that Athenian society is self-aware because they're able to cast judgment on each other, and that's why their forums existed. That's why the Agora and the Stoa existed. That's why the Athenian courts existed. So it gave people the ability to lob jabs at each other and be self-critical of each other. Now, some people are self-critical of themselves. Those people end up becoming the philosophers. Does that make sense? So you have this incredibly intricate society that I'm still just an infant in learning. This is an endlessly deep topic that's deeply nuanced, with people who are as intelligent and as perceptive as we are, and more intelligent and more perceptive than we are, and people who are extremely in touch with logic and reasoning, and who spent so much time having deep philosophical conversations, asking these perennial questions that we still ask today. And I think that connected with me on so many levels, more so than just like ancient historical or archaeological fascination. It felt like if I could better understand the civilization, I'd better understand myself, and I'd be a better person having known it, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, you can learn a lot from the Greeks. I mean, they're brilliant, and they were they thought about things differently than we do today as a global species, not just America versus any other country. But we could learn a lot by studying the Greeks today as opposed to the Romans. Oh yeah. Well, the Romans, it's kind of like they're fascinating, but you're studying. We are the Romans, essentially. We really are more similar to the Romans than the Greeks. That's a fact. Yeah. The Greeks are like an ideological thing to aspire to, and in reality, it's just a blip of Greek time. That's really all it was. It rose and then it fell, and that's why that's also why whether or not Plato's Republic and the story of Atlantis really is based on a kernel of truth. It's the reason he talked about it, because Atlantis is supposed to represent Athens. It's this rise of this very self-confident, capable, luxurious, beautiful civilization, and then it becomes overly competent and arrogant, and then it falls. And it's just 2 centuries, and it's this blip in time. After that, you have Alexander's father, Philip of Macedon, and he sees all the Greeks bickering with each other, and he just conquers all of them while they're bickering with each other, and then he uses their force to invade Persia. And then really Alexander, he gets in the car and drives it like he stole it, and then it's over after that. Then you have Hellenistic society, and but it's just this little blip in classical Greece that is like it is this one short period of limitless capacity of a civilization to express itself to the fullest and do everything at the highest level it's ever going to be done. And the only thing that's ever been similar to that and surpassed it is the United States. And that's why I feel like so drawn to this, to studying the Greeks, and kind of as a reminder of like how precious our society is. We have so many problems. The United States has done so many bad things, but a lot of people suffered to give you and I the ability to sit here today. And I think I don't have to condone anything of it. Nobody's asking really for like my opinion on it. I don't have to judge it, but I should have an appreciation for what was given to me from the blood of so many people, and just be aware of it, So yeah. Cool. Okay. It's a cool perspective. Yeah. And I appreciate your perspective very much. It's, Yeah, and I think that when you get there and you start studying it and you learn about it, it's really going to open up your mind to their reality. And I think there's a lot to learn from their reality.
Yeah, I think so. And I just love the fact that they were interested in the Egyptians too. It's this cool little window. When you're at Saqqara, one of the oldest places in Egypt, and you're standing there looking at the earliest periods in history, in Egyptian history, dynastic Egyptian history, they haven't really figured out how to make circular standing columns. So they have these columns that are attached to walls. But the design of these Doric-looking columns, they're not Doric, they're Egyptian. And it's the Dorians, which are really just Greeks, that come down into Egypt all throughout history, maybe over 2,000 years after these columns are put up, and they're like, this is really, really nice. We could make this out of marble. Look at the way that each one of these limestone blocks are something different. We don't have the stable, huge granite stones back in Egypt that you can lift this giant stone up and it doesn't crack in half, but we have marble. We can make this out of marble. Let's do that. They go, and then the whole design of Greek columns, these big marble temples, that's derivative of, or it's built on top of the columns that they took out of Egypt, that design there. And it is so obvious when you're there looking at it. And so, who really knows? I mean, here's something else. The Olympics. We didn't even talk about that, but it's too much to go into. But, we get organized sports from the Greeks as well. Well, when the Greeks are trying to figure out, the Olympics start becoming really, really popular. I should have said the Olympics are the thing that's most similar to the Colosseum that the Greeks have, but I think the theater is actually more important. But when the Greeks are trying to figure out a good philosophy as to how to allow other Greek states or other people on the fringes of the Greek world to participate in the Olympics, the Greeks are trying to figure out, well, how exactly do we do this? And they couldn't figure it out. So they go down to Thebes in Egypt, or Luxor in Egypt, and they speak to these priests there, or were they Egyptian philosophers? What was going on there? It's invisible in Egypt. We don't know. But we know that the Greeks were going down there to get wisdom from the Egyptians, and that a lot of Greek wisdom is derivative of things that were going on in Egypt. But it's this invisible chapter of history. And I just love that. And man, like next time I come, we got to talk about Alexandria, because Alexandria is a Greek city built in Egypt, and so much, it's like its own little civilization where it's Greek genius fused with ancient Egyptian, like really ancient Egyptian knowledge, and it creates the most beautiful city that the world has ever seen. Of course, it was ruled by a king, so it's different from Athens. But man, Alexandria, even Rome couldn't hold a candle to the city of Alexandria. So that's something we'll have to talk about at some other point.
Yep. Well, awesome, man. It's been great. Love to connect with you again. It's been amazing. We had a great conversation the first time that you came down into town, and I think we probably topped it on this one. Yeah.
Well, and like we were saying, I love the the direct essay focused parts of talking about ancient history, and then I love just having philosophical conversations about how we connect to the ancient people, and kind of what I was saying is like inside baseball as to how where you and I sit in this little sphere that we currently live in, that everybody watching is so invested in. It's cool to be like, I guess like self-aware, self-analytical of the space that you're in and talking about it. I love these kind of conversations.
Yeah. Agreed. Totally ditto. And my ego is identified with the Florida Gators. So hopefully by the time this episode comes out, we've got a basketball men's national championship as a part of my false self. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. So. When does this take place?
It should be. Sweet 16 starts Friday. So
okay.
It should be. I think by the time this will be, Ryan, we got two. I think out in front of this one with Nurse Penny and Randall Carlson, yeah. So
Well, I've seen leaks of this Randall episode coming out, or little not leaks, but like teasers or whatever. Don't you guys put out? You put out a couple episodes.
Yeah. We'll have all the shorts will be coming out.
I'm not saying that you're leaking stuff, Ryan.
I'm just getting snitched on everywhere today. My goodness.
Good stuff. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you, man, for this episode and all the episodes.
Yeah.
And Luke, it's been great to connect with you.
We got a big day tomorrow, too.
Yeah, big day tomorrow. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to hearing about the Kurt Cobain case.
I try not to take things to 100%, of course, but I'm 99% convinced that he was murdered. I mean, it's there's so much
That's
evidence.
not very open-minded of you.
It's 1% open-minded. But, I mean, there would have to be so many people lying about the evidence and what's real as it relates to this case that it just seems incredibly unlikely to that this could be anything other than a murder.
Cool.
So yeah,
It's gonna end up as a Netflix documentary.
It might. Yeah,
it's the perfect kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, there was one soaked in bleach.
Okay.
Yeah. That came out, and that's really what opened my mind to the possibility.
This is the one you said you saw in 2015.
Yeah. That Tom Grant was on there, and I invited him on the show, and we spoke, and it's just mind blowing. No pun intended. It's not too soon. It's been 31 years. But yeah, Kurt was dead when he got shot in the head with a shotgun already. There's no blood splatter. There's no fingerprints on the gun. The shell ejected the wrong way. The gun doesn't eject a shell when it's not shouldered. There's so many issues with and there's witnesses that now that we have that I've hired a lawyer for that were there at the house that night. Couple of people have died that were there already under very mysterious circumstances. An overdose like Kurt. Somebody got hit by a train. Somebody got hit by a car. So, and that's, people will chalk that up to crazy conspiracy. But when you look at the evidence and you really dive in, it at least needs to be looked at by the police. And it was never investigated. It was ruled a suicide the same day without any investigation. Very, very little investigation.
Wow.
Yeah.
So morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was shot in the head with a shotgun.
Yeah.
After he had passed.
Yeah.
Do you think, or do most people think that it was his wife that did that?
I don't want to talk about Courtney too specifically.
Okay. Sorry.
But she would have been the one. What I'll say about that is
that's dark.
Yeah, it's dark for sure. Yeah, her dad wrote a book about her assassinating Kurt Cobain. So he was convinced that she was the one.
No way.
Oh yeah. Courtney's dad wrote a book about 100%.
Whoa.
And a guy came out named El Duce who was in their friend group and a member of the band. And Courtney, he came out and said that Courtney offered him $50,000 to whack her husband Kurt Cobain. A guy came to his house. He gave an interview. Yeah, Courtney offered me $50,000 to whack Kurt Cobain. I couldn't do it. I was doing a gig, and I didn't do it, and blah blah blah. And then 3 weeks later, he's dead. He gets hit by a train. Accident. Walked in front of a train. The case was about to be reopened at that point, but was never opened. Bandmate of Courtney Love, Kristen Pfaff, was also likely murdered. She died a month after Kurt died of another heroin overdose in a bathtub. And they're working on getting the toxicology report right now. I'm not involved in that, but they're looking to try to see, well, how much heroin did this chick actually really have in her system? Because Kurt, they had never seen as much heroin as Kurt had in his system. The medical examiner had never seen that much in the history of Seattle forensics or in the history of Seattle medical examinations. They'd never seen that much heroin in the body of someone who had committed suicide. There's never been another suicide where somebody has shot themselves after being that high on heroin, because you don't do it. You do it when nobody ruins the high, but you can't do it. You can't you're asleep. You're essentially
I mean,
dead.
people, you fall asleep before you can even roll your sleeve down. I mean,
But he somehow his sleeve was
experience.
Somehow his sleeve was rolled down. Somehow his sleeve was buttoned. All the heroin was placed neatly back in the kit. The gun shell was placed neatly on his jacket across to the opposite side of the room that it should have been if the gun had ejected the shell, which it couldn't have. I mean, there's so much on this case. It's wild. It's just crazy.
I can't wait to see how this all unfolds. This is seriously cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's truth.
I mean, I'm sorry, it's dark, but it's obviously fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, an entire generation of Americans and globally. I made this comment on my last episode, and I said Americans, but I had people from Australia reaching out, a bunch of people were reaching out being like, look, I'm not American, but this had a profound impact on me. And when he died, and it's like, this suicide thing, when you lose somebody to suicide, that impacts you for the rest of your life. If you knew the person, and everybody felt like they knew Kurt, I mean, everybody had that connection. And so I think people have been really mourning his death and, struggling with it for an entire generation, and really kind of needlessly, if there's justice for Kurt, if the truth is out there, then I think that, it becomes a completely different situation. Not that it's right, not that it's good, not that everything's okay, but at least that the truth is known and that there's justice has been served. So.
Yeah.
But it's a tricky topic because I'm talking about murderers right now, and we know who they are, and they know that I'm talking about them. So it's a little bit uncomfortable to have the conversation because they've killed, a handful of people. So. No, it doesn't. I mean, we've mentioned, her name has been mentioned. Not that she was the one who pulled the trigger, but that name has been mentioned along with the others. And again, I'm going to leave that up to the Seattle Police Department. I know that Michelle, who I'm working with, is the one who knows all the players and knows the people involved, and I don't care about them. I'm not here to talk about them or to judge or to blame or to say that this is who did it. But I think that the Seattle Police Department needs to actually investigate this case. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that this was a murder, so it needs to be looked at. And I'm optimistic that it will be. Nothing's guaranteed. But we're doing it legally. This is the first time that a lawyer will have been hired to go in and actually, look at this thing and to present the evidence legally through a lawyer to the Seattle Police Department that's really well respected in the Seattle community. So this is the best chance that it's ever had and probably ever will have of being reopened. So,
yeah, man. Yeah. Well, that's profound that you're taking the step to do this. That's really cool.
Yeah. So is what it is. But it's you wish you didn't have to, I wish I could be working on flowers and rainbows, but but it is what it is, some stuff you got to dive into. So, man, what else? Anything else? That's probably the way to close it.
Probably so. Sorry to take a dark detour at the end, but I was so fascinated in this. I wanted to learn something from you about it.
Yeah, for sure.
I know I'm going to hear a lot about it tomorrow.
No doubt. No doubt. Yeah. I'm going to bring the gun. I bought the same gun that was used. So the serial number is just a couple of hundred apart, I think, from Kurt's actual gun. Same year, same model, same company.
Okay.
So,
Perfect.
I'll bring that and we'll show. It's very difficult for me to reach the trigger and to have it anywhere near my face. I actually have to use my index finger and point down to hit the trigger to actually pull the gun. So it's a huge long barrel gun, and Kurt's 5'9". I'm 6'1", but my upper body is very large compared to my leg. I'm like weird, like my legs are short. So, I mean, I should be able to reach that. If he's shooting himself at 5'9", I should be able to reach that, no problem. And I had a difficult time reaching it. So, there's questions as to whether or not he could have even reached the trigger. Why is there no blood splatter? If he was still alive, why is there no blood splatter?
Sure, that's a big one.
Yeah, on his hand, which was holding the barrel of the gun. It should have for sure been blood splatter. But it was a completely clean gun, no fingerprints on it. It's the handwriting. On the quote unquote suicide note, which wasn't really a suicide note. We think it was written a couple of years before. And then and then somebody wrote the bottom part of the suicide note, and the Cobain attorney, Rosemary Carroll, we reached out to her. She'll be subpoenaed in the case. She hasn't replied to us yet, but she's on record with Tom Grant saying that, and he recorded her saying this, I don't think he wrote the suicide note. I don't think it was a suicide note. And she's on record saying that the Cobains, that Courtney left a backpack at her house, and within the backpack they found practice handwriting notes of Courtney practicing Kurt's handwriting on paper. So we know that exists out there, and she also filed a false police report in the name of Kurt's mother. that said that Kurt was suicidal and you need to go find Kurt. My son, I don't know where he is. He's suicidal. She was spreading this suicide narrative after he was already dead, and she knew he was already dead. Very, very. If 99%.
Sounds like a nightmare, man. Could you imagine the people who are? I used to work in nursing homes.
Yeah.
When I was in college, and during college. And the things that people admit to at the end of their life is just shocking. All the time in nursing homes, in people's last days, they admit to a murder. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine living with the cloud of that over you after you had done something that dark? One of my chronic nightmares is that I have murdered somebody, and I'm trying to live like with that. I don't know why this is happening to me psychologically. Those dreams are so freaking dark and so scary and so filled with guilt. I couldn't imagine people who had actually done that,
Past life. Could be a past life.
It could be. Yeah. I was like Jack the Ripper or something.
Yeah, could be.
But, I just couldn't
this will be our last episode?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I'm just playing.
But yeah, I just couldn't imagine actually having actually done that, dealing with the guilt of it. I mean, not only have you done something awful, you have also ruined your own life. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's horrible all the way around. Like, it's horrible,
Yeah, no doubt. So, well, good, man. Let's wrap it up on the darkness.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.